in the world. And when I spoke to experts working on the West Wing, working on Homeland, no matter what side of the political spectrum they came from, and there was quite a mix, I always felt like I was talking to somebody who was incredibly brilliant, really good at what they do, and a good person who liked children and wanted to help children on the other side of the world. I never had that experience where I was like, you're corrupt and you're evil and you're out to get them or us or somebody. And I was like, well, maybe I just have a good list of people that I'm meeting with, or there is something about what we hope to do and what happens. And I wanted to sort of find the break in that. So talking about diplomats or foreign aid workers, as soon as I left the West Wing, I wanted to do that. And it took 20 years to get the show on the air. Eventually, I found a way to take the story and smack it together with a marriage story in a way that made it marketable. But it took a while.
It would be interesting. That's a great story, by the way. Fantastic. It would be interesting to pull apart that, not the marriage, but that story and that device. And also, we're here at Her Power, which as Diana, my excellent colleague Diana Marrero just explained, we feel is the #1 program on women's leadership at UNGA or in any environment. So thank you so much for joining. It would be great to understand a little bit more about how Ambassador Weiler, as a woman, became the lead for that, the protagonist in this story, and why that works. And also, by the way, she's such a flawed character. She's kind of crazy. She's got a crazy marriage. She's got all sorts of mental health issues really on top of it. But she's this flawed, relatable character. Is that just interesting TV?
Does she? Seriously, does she?
Yeah, I think so.
She has mental health issues?
Maybe she should. She seems stressed anyway. So perhaps maybe
Remind me to come back to that.
Okay.
That's interesting because she doesn't. We haven't played that. And this happens all the time. The thing I am most proud of myself about is that women think he's crazy and men think she's crazy. And we never, ever say it. Either way, this actually happens. I mean, on Homeland, the character had a mental illness. She had bipolar disorder. We've literally never said that. But you are not the first person who thinks that we did.
Guilty.
Bitches be crazy. So Beth Jones told that story about her first day as DCM in Pakistan. And I tracked her down when I decided I wanted to do this series. And she gave me a list of 40 female ambassadors. 40. Basically everybody she knew. Within an hour and a half of me calling her, she had called all of them and gotten permission to share their phone number with some writer that she didn't know. And one after the other, I got on the phone with them because I was supposed to go to Washington and to talk to them in March of 2022. So that didn't work out. But the upside was that 2020. COVID-19, 20, in March of 2020. And then we canceled it because somebody had a cold. And then it was COVID. But what that meant was I was calling a lot of people all over the world who were willing to pick up the phone. And there was a sameness to the women that I spoke to who were this kind of first generation of women ambassadors, which was they all kind of had the same look. They all looked like my mom. They were, they kind of kept it low key, and you didn't see them coming. And therefore they could be quietly everywhere and do just about anything. They were not, the Yale Pale and Male ambassador. They were not, they are raconteurs, but they don't tell you that at first, you got to sort of dig it out of them. And they really fly under the radar. A lot of them, when they talked about, working in the Middle East, it's an ambassador, so she's got to be able to go into the male spaces, but she's a woman, so she can also go into the female spaces. She's sort of, initially my question was always, is it difficult to get people to talk to you? But what they said was that they're considered a sort of a neutral gender in a lot of places, some sort of third category. So they can talk to everybody, and they do. And they're not looking for credit. They're just so grateful to have the job that they're keeping a low profile. And that works sometimes. I mean, it doesn't work all the time, but boy, it works sometimes.
And they have to work harder than the men, and they tend to be more driven than the men as well. I certainly find that with my excellent colleagues at FP who make FP so great.
Yeah, they all know that already, though.
They all know that already, though. So I have so many other questions for you, but we are actually at the end of our time. I knew we were going to need more time for this. But I want to thank you so much and congratulate you on the fantastic program that you've created. We're so excited for season 3. And
I'm going to take 30 seconds, which is just thank you for what you do. We are devastated by what's happening in this country, by the number of incredibly talented, experienced, and capable people who were fired and tossed out as though they were garbage. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Deborah Kahn. Got your pen?
Now, please welcome to the stage former Prime Minister of Finland and Club de Madrid member, Mari Kiviniemi.
Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here today.
So, have you ever watched The Diplomat?
Oh, yes, of course I have. And I'm looking forward to what's the third season.
So, interestingly, and we were talking about this earlier, there's another show that you may have seen called Occupied, which is really keyed in the Nordics and stars Norway rather than Finland. And if you haven't seen that one, a really good one, too. But also fantastic. And it seems like there's a lot of good TV in and around what you do.
I haven't watched Occupied, but we'll see.
So I wanted to start off by talking about Finland and women's leadership in Finland. So such a history of strong women leaders in Finland. Obviously, most recently, in addition to yourself, Sanna Marin as PM. Last year at Her Power here at UNGA, we had the pleasure of Tarja Halonen joining us. And she was one of the longest, she was president of Finland, and one of the longest serving heads of state ever. She ranks up there in the top 5. Why is that? Why does Finland have such a history of strong women leaders? And is that why you're so strong?
I think that one reason behind is that we started early. It was 1906 when to both men and women at the same time were granted the full political rights. So women and men were able to vote and also stand for elections. And earlier it was only a small minority of men who had the right for that. So maybe that kind of laid the basis for that good development, because that was something for everyone, the full political rights. Of course, it took decades for us to achieve the level of 46% of female parliamentarians, which we have now. We have had that situation of more than 40% for more than 20 years. And as you said, we have had only one female president, but 3 female prime ministers, and also women in all the leading positions in government as ministers of defense, finance, ministers for foreign affairs. So we have had role models in politics for many decades, and that has made it easier for new generations to take the lead.
So what are the lessons that we could take away for other countries, regions, and organizations in pushing forward women's leadership? It sounds like it takes a really long time and there's a lot of work involved. Are there any kind of guidepost takeaways? Is it legislation? Is it setting those goals and keeping to those goals and tracking those metrics? What is it?
Of course, you have to set goals and then really monitor your progress. Are you achieving them or not? But I think that one reason behind the progress in Finland is that we have always, or for many decades, supporting the workforce or labor force participation of women, which is very high in Finland. And that has been possible for women because we have so good public services when it comes to daycare centers, afternoon care system for children who are in their first to third grade. And also we have a very good system for parental leave, which make it possible for both parents actually to use that right. But when it comes to the daycare services, the point behind is that you have to have a system which is subsidized by the state, that families can afford the daycare service. And that is the case in Finland, because if you have one child, it depends on your income how much you pay, but the maximum amount also for the high earners is per month about $350. And the second child, it's only 50% of that. So very good system which supports women's labor force participation is needed. And third, which I want to mention inside this traditional tourism and then these good services is quotas. Sometimes quotas are also needed, and that was a Finnish case in the 1980s. We introduced in the municipalities and also at the state level the quota system, that in all the official committees, councils, advisory boards, at least 40% of the representatives had to be either men or women. So that laid the basis not only at the governmental level, but also in the municipality level for greater participation of women in politics.
Very enlightened. And unfortunately, we're in a period right now which is seemingly less enlightened, and there's a lot of stress on finances. All of these excellent programs that you just mentioned require that kind of financing. And with global funding for gender equality in decline right now, funding for everything in decline, but for gender equality in particular, what role do political leaders and multilateral institutions need to play to make sure that gets the attention that it deserves?
They just need to continue the good work and champion for gender equality at the national level and also at the global level. And we need role models, and that is not only women role models, but also male role models as political leaders who champion for gender equality. And at the global level, these multilateral organizations, they play a very big role in collecting data, monitoring the progress, and also by showing by example how important it is for all the societies to achieve the gender equality. There's a lot of very good surveys and data showing how important it is, also in terms of economics, because those countries which are more equal, the GDP growth is bigger, the communities are stronger, and also the decisions are better.
There's a clear ROI that needs to be demonstrated. That's great. You mentioned role models, and I'm curious if you could share, was there a moment early in your career where you thought, I'm destined for leadership, I can enter that sphere? And indeed, is there a role model that you would point towards, perhaps amongst Finland's great list of women leaders, that inspired you and helped you on your path?
Yes, many young female MPs inspired me. When I was a young girl, I was already at the early age very interested in politics because my family was active in politics, both my mother and my father, and even my grandmother. So I had already in the family role models. I had the feeling that this is something for everyone, also for me. But I think that those first young female MPs from different parties were role models for me.
If you were speaking right now to a 25-year-old woman considering a career in politics and policy, and I think you might be doing that right now, actually, here and online, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them to foster their careers? Let's focus on one piece of advice that you would give them.
So just go for it. And you need, of course, your self-confidence, and look at the role models, what the others have done, and that makes sure that you are able to do that too. And you have to kind of believe in that. What was actually a bit difficult for me in the beginning, because I thought that I'm not the type to be a politician, because I knew from my family, we had family friends who were MPs, so I was thinking, no, I'm not the type. But then I noticed when I started in politics that, oh, there's a place for marikivinimi also, the type of marikivinimi that's possible. And that is the case, that you need different personalities in politics. There is not this certain type of MPs, which is the right one. So believe in yourself and make your own career.
Fantastic. That's great advice. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us at Her Power.
My pleasure.
Because of who we are, we get caught up in war in ways you can't imagine. Abuse. Violence. Killings. Torture.
Abandonment.
We even fear getting our feelings. We have no place in the peace process.
The same has been true in almost all wars and conflicts in history.
But they look to us for things we've always done. Care,
And domestic responsibilities.
affection,
Under stress,
Loss.
uncertainty, and pain.
do you have any idea what that's like?
Didn't think so.
Did you know you have a better chance of peace when we're involved?
Didn't think so. This is what it's like for us.
In conflict,
Famine,
Genocide,
our lives and those closest to us are at risk.
We suffer more than you.
and somehow, we go on with it.
So know us,
hear us.
because we need you.
And you need us.
Qatar Fund for Development, alongside its strategic partners, empowers women and girls in times of conflict through humanitarian aid and developmental assistance.
Please welcome to the stage International Civil Society Action Network founder and CEO, Sanam Naragi Anderlini, and United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Africa in the Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations, Martha Ama Akia Pobi, for a conversation with FP's Senior Vice President of Research, Dr. Maisha Alam.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to having what I know will be an important and timely conversation with two incredible leaders. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge the stark reality that millions of women and girls face in conflict settings around the world, from Ukraine to Gaza, from Sudan to Myanmar, and so many other places in these unprecedented times when conflict is on the rise and conflicts are lasting longer than ever. So just to take a moment to pause and acknowledge that. Thank you. And with that, let's dive right in. I'm honored to have an opportunity to have this conversation with the Assistant Secretary General, who is at the helm of one of the most important parts of the UN addressing these issues, and Sanam, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with for decades at this point, and is one of the architects of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which for the first time acknowledged not only the impacts of conflict on women and girls around the world, but the critically important role that they play. And the 25th anniversary of that resolution is approaching us next month. So, Assistant Secretary General, I'd love to start with you and ask you, in reflecting on these 25 years, and now that we're at this critical juncture, this milestone, what structural changes do you believe are needed to make sure that peace building and development frameworks today are able to meaningfully ensure women's participation in conflict mediation and post-conflict recovery efforts? I'll start with you and then go to Sanam.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say a big thank you for this opportunity. The Department for Political Affairs and Peace Building, and also the Department for Peace Operations, try to make our contribution to solving the myriad problems in the political space, addressing conflicts, prevention, mediation efforts. And all of this, we recognize the important role of women and having the kind of structures in the room, in the space, and the voice that they do have the voice in actual fact, but getting them in the right places is really one of the key priorities that we have now. And your discussion today is very timely. It's next month, it's a quarter of a century since the adoption of Resolution 1325. I must say that although we do have challenges, we do have some achievements that we've scored, and I'd just like to highlight a few so we have things in perspective. First of all, we've been able to arrive at more robust language in texts negotiated on conflicts, in cessation of hostilities, and so on. Now, this increased from about 11 or so. If you look at Security Council resolutions, in the year 2000, we only had about 11 resolutions that made specific mention of women's contribution, but now we have as much as 34. Of course, that's in the text. I must say that it is an important indicator. We've also got some kind of a massive growth in terms of the understanding of the mainstreaming of gender as fundamental to the Security Council's peace and security work. So in all the discussions, you constantly have delegations making reference to that. Then we also have about 100 member states of the UN who've adopted national action plans on the WPS agenda, highlighting the integration of this work stream into policy planning efforts. We also have regional peace and security institutions. We have the African Union. We have the League of Arab States, ASEAN, NATO, the EU. All of these organizations have mainstreamed the WPS agenda. And this is something that we do not take lightly because it took a lot of effort and advocacy to get there. We also have large-scale projects like the Spotlight Initiative, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. We have the LC Initiative that was initiated by Canada, now has a lot of support. And we also have what we call the Gender Promotion Initiative of the Peace Building Fund. And all of these have been established to help support, in a concrete way, women-led initiatives on the ground. So I talked about enhanced advocacy, that's the political advocacy, mobilization of women's networks, that has been key. Civil society and voices of women around the world have been also helpful. And we've also got institutionalized monitoring mechanisms. These are very important for peace agreements. In a number of them, we have been able to get these on board. Funding, you cannot underestimate the importance of how to get the women there, and some of the training that we also offer as the United Nations, building their capacities so that when women have room at the table, they're able to make that impact and feel confident to be able to contribute in these discussions. Now, all of these have been very helpful in terms of approaches. In the area of peacekeeping, I must say that the missions have also played a facilitative role in reinforcing these commitments, working with member states and civil society to expand the space for women's engagement. So there is more to be done beyond these, of course, achievements, because now we see a pushback. We see challenges to what we thought we had agreed on in terms of the role of gender in peace and security. And there's a need to perhaps look at other approaches and action-oriented approaches, I must say, that will help us to counter what we are seeing. Now, as we see more and more bilateral engagements in terms of resolution of conflicts, and you see that across different settings, the role of the multilateral angle is being sort of pushed aside, and therefore we are unable to do what we thought we could do, getting women there. And so these bilateral engagements, something else that, as a hurdle that, I mean, it's good, but we need to see how we can still encourage them to include women.
Absolutely.
So that's very important.
Absolutely.
So we, of course, we've come up with the Common Pledge, which the Secretary General launched last year in October around the WPS month. And the idea is to get member states to sign on to it, to include women. You know, there are a number of criteria that and conditions set so that those who sign on to it pledge to do so. And all of this is to see how we can also push back on the pushback.
Pushback, yeah.
So,
well, thank you for that, and I appreciate everything that you said, because it really does help put into perspective that over the last 25 years, there have been a lot of really important initiatives in a range of areas, and that isn't something to be discounted or dismissed by any means. And Sanam, I know, having worked with you, you've been involved in many of them over the course of the last quarter century. And so let me bring you into the conversation and hear a little bit from you about, in terms of, you know, how do we go from these many commitments, frameworks, pledges, and so on that the ASG just beautifully laid out, to enacting them on the ground. And that's really where ICANN works, your organization. So tell us a little bit from your vantage point how you see that happening, and any specific examples that you can share of where it's been done and had meaningful impact.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you all, and I'm sorry I can't see the audience at that end of the room. Yes, so, you know, if we put it in a historic context, it's remarkable the progress we've made, because for 2,500 years, you know, since the Persians and the Greeks went to war, basically, however many years ago that was, peace and war have been negotiated by political and military men, largely, right? It's been very limited. It's the most exclusive space that you can get into. In the last 25 years, by getting Resolution 1325, we bust open the doors. We said, not only women should be there, but civil society peace actors, not just the warring actors. The peace actors should be there. So this is a massive paradigm shift in how we think about war and peace, and who is an actor? Why is it that only the violent get a ticket to the table, right? Think about it. Why didn't Afghan women get invited to the table to think about the future of their country, and we only talk to the Taliban and let them take control? So it is, theoretically, conceptually, it is a remarkable shift in thinking. Secondly, around issues of sexual violence, for example, in 2008, I remember being in the back channel negotiate, language on text for the resolution to recognize sexual violence as a threat to peace and security, because we know it. We know when there is rape that it inflames conflicts and ceasefires and so forth. We were trying to get language in around men and boys as victims of sexual violence as well. And there were governments on the Security Council at the time that said, no, this doesn't happen to men and boys. So we ended up, I remember we would get these red line and I would have to put in gender neutral language. So it was women and girls, and then people, civilians, to be able to include men and boys. Once we got the resolution and the discussions opened up for women to speak about this aspect of conflict, all of a sudden the men started saying this happens to us as well. So we've opened up spaces to talk about issues that were historically never addressed. So all of these things are super important. That said, where are we now? I worked inside the UN for many years. I was training staff. I was the first gender and inclusion expert on the standby team of the Department of Political Affairs. And the reason why I went inside was that I always believed that if you're going to advocate something, you better know how to do it yourself. You've got to preach what you practice and practice what you preach. And what I saw was how much opportunity there is to do things. So I was in the Somalia process. We had to, we advocated to get Somalia women into the negotiations. There was a famine going on at the time. And I remember sitting with my UN colleagues and saying, we're using the language of power sharing for these men who have come and they want to be president of this state and that state and become cabinet ministers and so forth. Many of the women hadn't come because they were dealing with a famine, right? And I said, well, why can't we talk about responsibility sharing? Why don't we flip the language? Because if you want to become Minister of Finance in a war-torn country, you better take responsibility for everybody's needs. Power has a tendency to be about me, myself, and I, right? So this flipping and reframing of things is part of what we should be doing and we should be thinking about. In terms of examples, at ICANN, we now spearhead the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WASP, which means connect in many languages. We have partners in 42 conflict-affected countries. They're all locally rooted, independent women's peacebuilding organizations. And we've provided like a collective, it's a United Nations of women peacebuilders for them. But what we see is, for example, in Yemen, the Association of Mothers of Detainees, they have been negotiating using tribal and kinship pathways to negotiate the release of detainees, which is a critical step in the confidence building measures that were being negotiated at the higher levels, right? We have, at the moment in Syria, in the last 10 years in Syria, we were supporting networks, and we still continue to support them, networks, women-led peace networks, where they were bringing together people across the political divide in highly polarized settings. Sounds slightly familiar, doesn't it? Highly polarized settings, very difficult political context, teaching people how to talk to each other and find common ground and mediate local conflicts. Those women were in place when HTS came in and the Assad regime fell, and they were mediating in real time at the local community level. And now they tell us, look, the high-level politics is important, but a lot of the violence starts at the local level because there's revenge and retribution and these kinds of things. We need social reconciliation. That's a concept that they're framing. Our Colombian partners are saying the same thing. So we're seeing across countries the similarity of issues that people are seeing, the similarity of approaches, and then we started a fund 10 years ago, and we fund them to do that. It's called the Innovative Peace Fund at ICANN. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting hearing both of you speak, and much of what the ASG was laying out is really about what needs to happen at the national level, at the international level, and through multilateral engagement. And Sanam, what you were talking about is about taking all of that, but bringing it to the grassroots, right? And you can't have one or the other. You really need both, and they need to work in tandem. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask both of you one more question before we wrap up, which is, we've had an opportunity to reflect in terms of how far we have come and where we still need to go. So if you could issue a call to action in terms of, as we approach this anniversary and look to the next 25 years, what are some concrete actions, not just commitments, but actions that key stakeholders, whether it's multilateral institutions, governments, development partners, need to take in order to carry this work forward and to not just push back on the pushback, to use the ASG's words, but really drive momentum forward? So I'll go to you first, Sanam, very quickly, and then let the ASG have the last word.
Listen to our partners. Listen to the women who are living this reality, who are the first responders, the always responders, the last responders, the ones who are warning us about what's going on, the ones who are taking the risks with their own lives. They can advise the UN. They can tell you whether an agreement is good, even if we can't get them to the table, which is fundamentally what we should be doing. They need to be there as independent delegations of their own, on equal. They're actually much more legitimate than the armed actors, but we need the armed actors. But the international community should be listening and taking lead from them. And Nelson Mandela did it in 2000 with the women of Burundi, right? It's been done before. We have so much precedence of ways in which this has been done, and I'd be happy to share that with anybody afterwards.
Great. ASG, the last word to you.
Thank you. And just to take it off from where she ended, which is actually started, to listen to the women. And in the rural setting, in the community setting, we know the kind of tasks women have to do on a daily basis. Not just care for children, taking care of the community, everything is on them, farming. And therefore, we need to support them. And this is where the nexus comes into play. Development, peace and security, humanitarian. So women caught in displacement camps, how do they become a voice in anything? So we need to find the support. So fetching water or getting the health of the children, if the women are not enabled, empowered through a little bit of economic support, their livelihoods, helping them to develop and to earn the kind of incomes that make their voice even sound louder in the community, giving them the time and the space. We're only making these noises, but even in the community level, you find that it's not every woman who is in the same place. So we need to pay attention, even at the community level, to making sure that we empower the women and the confidence that they need to be able to speak up when we even invite them to talk, because it can be quite challenging for them. So, and the last thing I want to say, resilience stuff, it's something that we need to keep going, persistence. Women have come far, not easily. We're constantly pushing, and we need to do more, because looking globally, what is happening around, I tell you, we need women's voices now more than ever. And let's get the young women involved. They are the future.
Can I add one point to this?
Sure, very quickly. We are out of time, but I'll let you.
This agenda is not about equal opportunity for women to be allowed to go into the military to kill and maim and be killed and maimed. It's transformative equality. It's so that our sons and our fathers and our brothers and cousins also don't have to live through the hell of war. It's about peace for everyone, and it's women who are leading the agenda. So at this time of militarism, it's a super important agenda, and the women are out there. We have networks out there who are speaking about these things.
So. And we're doing this work every day, despite the odds. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and for that call to action.
Next, please welcome Mohammed bin Zayed Foundation for Humanities, Tala Al-Ramahi, and Delta Philanthropies President and CEO, Elizabeth Tanya Masiwa, for a conversation with GTS media founder and journalist Stacey Samuel.
To see such a full room for her power. Let's not forget this moment. You know, it's 30 years since the Beijing Women's Conference, so I love that we're having this, and that, you know, foreign policy has really made it a part of their programming. So with that, I want to set up today's conversation, or this conversation. I'm going to start with a staggering statistic. You know, the UN in 2023 found that 700 women die from preventable causes linked to pregnancy and childbirth every day. That was in 2023. Nearly all were in low and middle income countries, and they were all preventable. So closing this gap isn't just about saving lives. It's really about unlocking $1 trillion a year for the global economy. So I set the stage because right now we have with us joined Tanya Masiwa, and Tala Al-Ramahi, who are showing how collaborative philanthropy is really the next generation in pooling resources, making bigger bets that can transform women's health worldwide. So let's dive in. I want to start with looking at the fact that you both represent two foundations. I'm going to start with the Delta Philanthropies Foundation that you are the operating officer of. You know, when we look at closing the gap in women's funding, we seek to prevent as many deaths as possible. Can you talk a little bit about how Delta Philanthropies is approaching the sort of next generation of philanthropy by really focusing on collective funding?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think that statistic is extremely scary because it reminds us that the issue of women's health is not just a poverty issue, but it's a global issue, and it's also an issue of access. And up to 90% of the deaths that you mentioned happen in low and middle income countries. And so at Delta Philanthropies, we have really shifted the way that we do things to firstly listen to the voice of communities when we look at how we approach challenges, but also looking at systems change. When we look at, for example, the issue of maternal health, some of the hospitals we have in a lot of the countries that we work in were built during colonial times. Our current governments have not made the significant investments that are needed to increase capacity at those hospitals, to train workforce. We don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses. And so when you're in philanthropy, you know, sometimes you just want to come and bring more doctors and bring more nurses. But we really have to look at the system and look at what part we play in that. And so when you look at that, there is no way that one philanthropist can do it alone. And that's why collaborative funding has become so pivotal to what we do. And we partner with MBZ, yay, one of our favorite partners. But it's just really looking at how can we pull together as philanthropists to drive more resources and have impact at scale.
With that, I want to ask you, Tala, you know, both of your philanthropic funds actually participate in some of these very interesting funds like the Beginning Funds, which seek to prevent, again, 300,000 avoidable deaths and improve the quality of care for millions of women. How does this collaborative funding fit into the vision of the Mohammed bin Zayed Foundation for Humanity?
Thank you so much, Stacey, for this question. For those who don't know, the Mohammed bin Zayed Foundation for Humanity is a foundation that's based in the UAE and funded by His Highness the President of the UAE. Our ethos is pretty much what Tanya described as the ethos of their foundation, which is that we want to tackle some of the world's pressing challenges in global health, but we don't want to do it alone. Because we know if we pool our funding with other foundations, we can achieve the scale that we need, we can realize the impact that's required. And so we're not just bringing more money to the table or bringing more ideas, we're able to scale where we need in the countries that require it most. And so often what we do is we work very closely with other founders or foundations that share very similar focus areas as we do, and we co-create with the foundations, but most importantly, co-create with the beneficiary governments. Because at the end of the day, if we want to achieve the scale and the sustained impact that's required, there is no other way than to do it than making sure beneficiary governments are committed to this agenda and are able to take this forward after our own funding is depleted, essentially. And so, as Tanya mentioned or alluded to, the Beginnings Fund, which is one of our shared pooled funds that's aimed at addressing and averting maternal and newborn deaths in 10 countries in Africa, aims to do exactly that. So we work very closely with the beneficiary governments. We understand what kind of systems, what kind of infrastructure they currently have, and where we need to be investing in better workforce to ensure that mothers and babies don't die during childbirth, as well as investing in the systems that sustain this work moving forward.
You know, that's so interesting because so many countries that have made enormous progress, still we can't overlook the fact that in Africa, the continent and so many of the countries in the continent broadly bear the majority of these deaths. So Tanya, can you talk about how the Beginnings Fund seeks to help address this, because there are very targeted investments, like Tala was saying, in maternal health and the workforce. I mean, there are some essential life-giving equipment and innovations and medications that are needed. How are you working within the fund to achieve all of that?
So the first thing is basically the fact that it is a collaborative fund. So how do you get more philanthropists with a common vision around one area to come together and pool their resources in a very significant way? The second thing that is really important to us, and Tala mentioned this, is involving governments, ensuring that they're there at the table right from the beginning and ensuring that they have skin in the game. So with the Beginnings Fund, with every country that we are going into, we have negotiated with the government, not just the Ministry of Health, but the Ministry of Finance, to ensure that there is government ownership and government commitment. And then it's looking at what grassroots organizations are there that you can work with to drive this, and then what established organizations are there. So I think with the Beginnings Fund, it's really looking at a network of stakeholders, and then looking at how we as philanthropists can also have a trust-based approach in bringing these, in being a participator, as opposed to trying to prescribe a solution.
Tala, please pick up on that.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. I want to build on Tanya's comment around trust and the importance of trust in these kind of collaborative and pooled funds. Obviously, we know that pooled funding is the way to go, especially in an era of constrained fiscal resources. But I don't think we speak enough about how difficult sometimes it is to be a part of a pooled fund, because you have many stakeholders that are on the table. Some have competing priorities, though we're all aligned on a shared vision. But oftentimes, if we're being very honest, we also disagree on how do we approach certain challenges that come through this work. And I think for us, what we found works really well is being radically collaborative and radically honest when we're approaching our pooled funds and the partners that are a part of this.
So I want to continue with that, because in the work that you've done, there are quite a few lessons learned. Maybe you can take us a little bit through the journey, the more recent journey, or since 2017, the Reaching the Last Mile Fund. Because what you're doing is really a shift in how, development funding is approached. So there's some lessons learned. Can you take us a little bit through that journey?
Sure. Happy to do so. In 2017, we launched a fund called Reaching the Last Mile Fund. It was also a pooled fund where His Highness had seeded the investment along with Bill Gates at the time, and we had a few other foundations come in. The mission of the fund was to eliminate 2 neglected tropical diseases in 7 countries. 6 of them were in Africa, and then we also had Yemen as the 7th country. At the time of launch in 2017, we were targeting to raise $100 million. And to be completely honest, it was difficult. Primarily because neglected tropical diseases, while not necessarily deadly, impact the world's most poorest communities. The poorest communities, often the most neglected. And thankfully, what we tried to do with this fund is we wanted to first pilot this fund and ensure that we can showcase success. Fast forward a few years later, this year, Niger became the first country in Africa to eliminate river blindness, which is one of the NTDs that was funded through Reaching the Last Mile Fund, and we have Senegal on the way very soon. We have since expanded this fund to become a $600 million fund to encompass the entire continent, to eliminate those 2 NTDs from the African continent. I think what we've learned on the way is that with issues that are often neglected or underfunded, similar to the issues on women's health, we need to make sure that we have sustained resources, but also the advocacy and the right advocates for these issues. But also, most importantly, to think about how the partnerships are kind of navigated around the pooled fund like one very practical example is how do we ensure that we have the right governance in place, not just to make sure that countries are leading in some of the decision making around where the investments should go, but also who should be on the table when making some of these decisions. And we had to learn on the way. During the first phase of the fund, while we achieved a lot of success to date, I think what we've learned is we weren't involving countries enough. And with the Beginnings Fund, we made sure that country engagement began from day zero. And that has really shifted the way that we've thought about our work and continue to do our work with other partners as well.
And, you know, that leads to what we had been talking about earlier, Tanya, that the Reaching Glass Fund campaign, which started in 2017, was an inspiration for the Beginning Fund. Can you talk about how what you've done since 2024 in building some of these health systems, and maybe what the call to action might be for other organizations and the key stakeholders in making funds like this actually achieve what it is you're setting out to do?
Yeah, I think we're almost like at a shift in terms of how we do philanthropy, how we view aid, and who the participators are at the table. As an African, I think that this season has called for African governments to take a lot more responsibility, especially when it comes to health funding. When we look at, Reaching the Last Mile Fund, it was extremely, we just thought we can't ignore some of the successes that we have seen around this. We too participated, but only specifically funding Zimbabwe, looking at lymphatic filariasis. And we look at also the economic impact of some of these diseases. But the key thing is we were passionate about women's health, and we wanted to see less women and babies die during childbirth. And these are preventable diseases that we are aiming for. And the hospitals really, and the communities, are in dire need of seeing more people just give women's health attention. And so we had to apply that around this particular issue.
I want to give you, Tala, an opportunity for a call to action as well.
Wow. I think really the call to action, especially in an era of constrained fiscal resources, we cannot ignore this, is to make sure that we're looking at issues that are often underfunded, neglected, but understanding the possibility of coming together as foundations, but also as partners in this work. And so I urge everyone here to consider what that means for your organizations or for the people that you represent.
With that, thank you, Tala Al-Ramahi and Tanya Masiwa. I was going to get it right before I left. Thank you both. I hope that you find some inspiration.
Please welcome to the stage CARE President and CEO, Michelle Nunn.
Being produced. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. Again, I wanted to sort of take the moment to say that 30 years ago in 1995, and some of you are way too young to even remember that, the UN's World Conference in Beijing was a historic gathering that established a platform calling for increased investment in women and women's economic empowerment through equal access. So that's why we have the good fortune to have Michelle Nunn, CEO of CARE and CEO and President of CARE. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm glad to be with you all.
One of the things that we are most concerned about, there have been a lot of gains in 30 years. What happens as we start seeing a regression?
Well, I do think we have to celebrate, as was said earlier, the historical context of we have made good progress. So we have to continue to remind ourselves of that at the macro historical level. But we also are starting to see regression, and we can see it in so many different dimensions from a gender equality perspective. We know CARE has spent 80 years since the very first care packages post-World War II developing and supporting life-saving assistance. And we have realized when you do that work of defeating poverty, of saving lives, that when you center women and girls, that you have a disproportionate impact on families, on communities. And so we know that women's economic power, we're talking about power, is at the center of the journey for gender equality. And CARE actually over the last few years has surveyed, we've talked to people that we work with around the world. We've interviewed over close to 30,000 women. And you know what their number one concern is when you ask them what's most important to them, what's the biggest challenge? It is income. Right? They want more income for their families so that they can support their children, so that they can support the totality of their families' aspirations and needs. And so when we think about what is ahead from a gender equal world perspective, it's got to be women's economic power. And I think that's part of the journey that CARE's on. We've seen a lot of pushback. We know that, for instance, institutional funding is falling back. But we have to find new approaches, new ways, and we have to keep this on the agenda.
So let's talk about some of the new ways. It's going to take different stakeholders. You know, can you talk a little bit about multi-sector investment for women's economic empowerment?
Absolutely. And the first thing is, I don't want to give up on the fact that we can get our governments to stand with us in developing and focusing on women's economic power. For instance, in the first Trump administration, one of the signature initiatives was around women's economic power globally. So in addition to that, though, we are going to need, there is no problem that can be solved without some kind of multi-sectoral investment and engagement and partnership. And so as we move forward, without giving up on government, continuing to tell our stories, continuing to advocate across the aisle, we also, I think, are going to need new forms of financing. We're going to need creative business partners, and we're going to need big ideas. You just heard about big funds focused on global public health and women. We need that kind of investment as well in women's economic power. And you know, CARE is working with a variety of partners to conceptualize just that.
Right. Can we talk about maybe some corporate partners that can be very influential? And I mean, just with some starting funds, what can be done?
Let me just give you one example, one story. MasterCard has been an investor in CARE's work. And over the last few years, the first initial investment they made was a $5 million investment to help us in Pakistan and Peru and Vietnam to work with local financial institutions and to help support them to create products that were relevant for micro entrepreneur women. And what they were able to do, what we were able to do collectively, was to work with local financial institutions to help them find what are the barriers that are keeping women from access. Some of them are quite simple. For instance, not being able to take out any line of credit without your husband's signature is an example. But there were others as well. But since the last few years of doing that work, we have enabled, through those banking institutions, $200 million and counting of investments, loans to micro entrepreneur women.
Okay, so the $5 million investment
translates into $200 million of sustainable loans. And if we work with the private sector with specific capacity for them to learn what do they need to do in order to unlock the market for women entrepreneurs, then we can create, you know, transformational engagement on their part and new capacities for women and girls. And we also know, I mean, we've quoted, and it seems, you know, when you talk about trillions of dollars, but trillions of dollars in latent and needs to be unlocked that could add up to 20% to our global GDP. So this is absolutely the case of win, 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 win.
Okay, so you started to make a case for governmental investment, but so what does the future look like, and what role can the government play in funding and in advancing women's and gender equality?
Well, I think we need to put back on the table with the U.S. government that we should be investing in not only humanitarian response, but also long-term development. And that girls' education, that women's economic power, yes, we should all clap for that, actually. And we need to say that this is important, that we have bipartisan understanding and engagement around this. We have had a history of this, and we need to put it back on the table. And I think but it's not only international assistance. We need to make sure that local governments, wherever they are putting this as a priority. We still have work to do here in the U.S. There's not a single country in the world that shouldn't be putting women's engagement, women's equality, and women's economic power at the top of their agenda if they want to realize the full potential of their populations.
Right. What are you hearing from the women that care services? What are you hearing from them right now in terms of what they're looking for, what they're hoping for? Where does their hope lie in the future?
Well, I think you heard me say that women want to be able to have access to income. They want to be able to support their families. They want to have a voice in the conversation, not only with their community, but also within their family, and that when they have access. So, for instance, CARE has and runs and manages the largest micro savings program collectively in the world. We have 22 million people that are a part of that. 70% of those people are women. Let me just give you one example because I think it speaks to it. A woman in Cote d'Ivoire who was 14 when she was married, had 5 children by the time she was 20, was living in abject poverty, was introduced to the savings group, took out a loan, started her own small business, was able to support her family, send her children to school, buy a car to let her older children have a taxi service. And on top of that, she personally recruited 20,000 women to participate in these savings groups. So that is the kind of power that we want to be able to lift up for women around the world so that they can release that power for others and stand with their community and other neighbors. On top of that, she then recruited 48 additional women, what they called themselves the Amazons, and together over 2 years, they managed to recruit another 48,000 people into those VSLA circles. Okay. So I think what women are saying is we have the power, we want to be able to unlock it, and we want to be able to support other women around the world to do just that. So I want to be like Salamatu, and I want all of us to be like Salamatu and help unlock the power of women here and around the world.
There is no better call to action than that. This is what we can all do here. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the work you're doing.
And now, please welcome Guttmacher Institute Vice President for International Research, Dr. Onikepe Owalabi, for a conversation with FP's Dr. Maisha Alam.
Hello again. Nice to see all of you here in person and online. And welcome, Oni. I'm so delighted to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. You are in a really important role at Guttmacher, which is one of the world's preeminent institutions when it comes to reproductive health and advocating for women globally and especially in the health space. So let's dive right in. We're in quite the turbulent time, and I want to ask you first about maximizing impact with limited resources. I know something that's front of mind for you. Tell us, how can policymakers and stakeholders prioritize family planning investments to reach women who have unmet needs in a time when there's a downturn in funding? How do we make sure that those unmet needs are addressed and that, family planning doesn't fall off the agenda, so to speak?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maisha. It's lovely to be here and with you again. And it's such a great question. This is something that's on everyone's mind. So I'm going to quote a few numbers, and because we sort of invest in global models and data, I will tell you that these numbers are a sneak peek from our Adding It Up program, which will be released on November 5th at the International Conference of Family Planning in Bogota. So if you look for them online, you won't find them, but in 2 months you will. So if you need to know something, please write me. But sort of stepping right into it, our new estimates tell us
that the cost of meeting all women's needs for contraceptive care annually would amount to 14 billion US dollars right now. And that's a lot of money. But then I think more important, I want to hone in on the concept of need, because need is one of the most critical factors for those of us who work in measuring family planning. And why need? Need helps us really think carefully about what we need to provide high quality family planning services that align with the principles of voluntariness and that really listen to what women want, which I think is something we've heard all the former speakers say. Now, for a long time, the family planning field has traditionally defined need based on the number of women who say they want to avoid a pregnancy and are not using a modern contraceptive method. So those women actually haven't been explicitly asked, what do you want? Because we know that wanting to avoid pregnancy doesn't directly translate into wanting to use a method. But because we all know that we need the voices of women in our programs, in these estimates and in collaboration with many of our colleagues, we've moved into defining a much more nuanced measure of need. One that takes account of the fact that women want to prevent pregnancies, but we're now starting to look at the number of women who have explicitly said, yes, I would like to use a method or I intend to use one in future. And why is this really critical? Understanding and segmenting out this smaller subgroup is very important for policymakers, because when you're trying to prioritize limited investments, this is the right first subgroup to go to within your national budgets. They want to prevent pregnancies. They've expressed a clear need for it, which doesn't undermine their agency. And so if you're thinking of the narrowest definition of where should I put my funds as a policymaker, those are the women you want to target. You're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. It's not going to be wasted. Now, having said so, it wouldn't serve us well as people who respect all women and girls to just focus on one subgroup, because we know that sometimes need is tied to the context you live in, your culture, your environment, your stigma. And so drawing on our data, we see that adolescent women who express this new nuanced need, which we're calling unmet demand, have 3 times as much unmet demand as all other women of reproductive age. And so when you think of that definition of need, even though some people think that it's very uncomfortable to talk about adolescent access to contraception, this is a group that has expressed a great need for it. And so when governments are thinking of prioritizing investments, you want to find a way to get it into the hands of those people. But then I'm going to end by saying something. Sometimes it feels very challenging to reach the last mile. Sometimes we don't even have the surveys that capture need in the last mile. But when we think of women in humanitarian contexts, in Gaza, in Ukraine, in sub-Saharan Africa, we know that they express a strong need for family planning methods. Regardless of what happens, people have sex, but they don't necessarily want to get pregnant. These women are exposed to a greater risk of gender-based violence and sexual violence. And so whilst we think of funneling resources and really getting need to low-hanging fruit, we need to remember that reaching the last mile is absolutely critical, and we can't neglect it because it's too hard to do.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think the way that you spoke about need and unmet demand and what are we really talking about is so, so important. And I appreciate you sharing those statistics as well. We're both social scientists, and so that's definitely, I think, one of the ways in which we can most effectively demonstrate, to your point, returns on investment. And so let me ask you this. Whether it's integrating family planning better into primary healthcare systems, or whether it's tailoring approaches to women and adolescent girls' life course, right? What kind of innovative partnerships and interventions are necessary at this point in time, in your view, in order to not just make sure that modern contraceptive methods are reaching women and girls who need them, adolescent women who need them, but also that, in this time when there is a widening funding gap, that we're not losing sight of comprehensive sexual health and reproductive rights?
Another really good question. So I think one thing to note is if you think of the broadest definition of need, because numbers help put it in context, there are 214 million women who want to avoid pregnancy and don't have access to modern contraceptive methods. That's a huge number. And to kind of reach them, we have to think strategically, like you've said. So first of all, it makes perfect sense to embed family planning services into existing health infrastructure. Now, as a social scientist, I know that when you think of all SRHR services, there are some services that tend to get lost, safe abortion care, gender-based violence care. But for family planning particularly, we have whole primary healthcare systems that are absolutely practical for us to embed that care within. And so some of the greatest success we've seen in programming come from programs like the INSPIRE program in Francophone West Africa, which started in 2017. And when family planning was integrated with antenatal care, with immunization, with childhood nutrition, it supported women by making sure there were no missed opportunities. Many people travel far and wide with other children and family to walk to a primary healthcare center. So whilst they're there, give them a basket of services that allows them to access everything they need and not come back over and over again. And so what that program saw was a 123% increase in new family planning users. And when they did it at postpartum family planning clinics, they saw a 275% increase, because at that point, women are primed for that kind of information. The other thing that's really important to note is often when we talk about primary healthcare, we're thinking of formal healthcare systems. But for very many women, think a 35-year-old in busy urban Accra, Lagos, or Nairobi, the primary healthcare provider is the drug vendor down the street. And so sort of expanding that definition of what counts as frontline care for women, and governments holistically integrating commodity provision, training healthcare workers so that they're able to task share and take on the task of providing long-acting methods like implants and IUDs where possible is absolutely critical to reach the most that need people.
It's, your last point is so interesting. You referenced the kind of your neighborhood pharmacist, right? Or the person from whom you might buy your medications. But that's true with community health workers, with midwives, who actually is interacting with women and adolescent girls who need this, right? And to your point, that have unmet demand. But what I'm also thinking about as I listen to you speak is when we talk about need and unmet demand, it's certainly not exclusive to low and middle income countries. It's across the board, across the world, including here in the United States and much of the world. And so how are you thinking in your role about making sure that, wherever it is, that there is a continued focus on MCPRs, that this, again, doesn't become an issue that people take for granted, and also that people don't necessarily fall into thinking that, they can forego the options that are available to them.
Yeah. So one thing you had talked about in your earlier question, which I didn't get on, I think speaks to this, is sort of like, what is the funding gap? How do you make sure people know this is important? Our earlier estimates in 2019 estimated a funding gap of 31 billion. When you look across the ranges of needs, so from unmet demand all the way to unmet need, which many people are familiar with, we estimate a funding gap of between 42 to 54 billion to meet all women's contraceptive needs. That's a critical funding gap. Then how do you get to that in these times? So first of all, to mobilize those resources to make sure people don't forget, it's absolutely imperative that any agenda to increase funding is embedded in national strategy. Part of the reason why family planning finds itself where it is now is because it's been hugely dependent on donor funding, and not just donor funding, but donor funding that supports the basic infrastructure of the healthcare system, facilities, health workforce recruitment, health information systems. And so as we sort of go forward as a community and we try to mobilize new and better money, as the Gates Foundation will call it, we want to make sure that's closely tied to a national strategy. We want to make sure that's closely built into the government's agenda. And we want to make sure that those building blocks of the health system are largely funded by national governments. Now, how do we raise that money and make sure it's important? I think the first thing is there are two things. We can introduce new money, there's not a lot of that, but we can also expand the fiscal space for governments. And how do you expand the fiscal space? By supporting them to do more effective taxation, By thinking of debt reduction and moving into innovative financing methods like debt swaps, such as have been, shown by the Global Fund, by thinking of social impact bonds and development impact bonds, and all in all, by making sure all of this money isn't siloed and just for family planning, by using it to pan out a fully integrated health system. What do we gain if we do that? We could reduce maternal mortality by 70% if we're able to mobilize all these resources. We could reduce neonatal mortality by 62%. And all in all, we could dramatically limit the number of unsafe abortions by 70%.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that last point and what you said. There are ways to do this, even in a constrained financing environment, and that the results are immediate, but they're also across generations. Oni, thank you so much for joining us and for this conversation and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Next, please welcome FP 2030 Executive Director, Dr. Samu Dubey, Bayer Global Impact Partnerships Lead, George Roberts, and Indonesian Health Ministry official, Dr. Siti Nadia Tarmizi, for a conversation with journalist Rina Nanan.
Thank you all so much. I have to say, I think foreign policy does an incredible job with live events. What do you guys think? This was an oversubscribed event, so I'm so thrilled all of you could be here in these chairs today. And we're going to have a great conversation today. I want to start off first with Dr. Samu. Dr. Samu, I spoke to you on our podcast, The Hidden Economics of Remarkable Women, in 2024, the spring. It was season 6. And the last we left our conversation, I specifically asked you, how do we increase access to family planning? What do people at the very top need to do to make that happen? And what you said to me was, you've got to reinvigorate the leadership. You've got to have conversations around financing. I'm curious, what is your organization doing, FP 2030, that you feel is helping to get people on board for that funding?
Thank you for that question. Actually, it sounds like many years ago, right? Last year, because a lot has changed and a lot has happened. So, first of all, I think leadership in this complex space is, for me, it has been like defining a future that doesn't exist. And that future didn't exist last year. It exists now. What have we done from last year up to today for around that leadership that reinvigorates people to really journey around family planning, around financing, etc.? First, I think for me, I left that conversation with the mantra that it starts with me. Because leadership is about being bold. It's about saying it. It's about ensuring you feel that silence that actually exists when you are all scared. And I think FP 2030 has been in the forefront of making sure the voice around what is important in family planning is heard loud and clear. We have reinvigorated this space through what we are calling today Made Possible by Family Planning, which is a campaign that seeks to bring in and ensure the narrative around family planning is normalized. In fact, when I got a job at FP 2030, I was like, family planning, is it a job? Shouldn't this be an everyday thing? Why should it be a job? And it means that I still have a long way to go if it still is a job. And for me, I think the leadership that we have been trying to do is to normalize family planning. Family planning is not a luxury. It should be contraception in your day-to-day activities, in everything that you do. We shouldn't exceptionalize family planning. And we have been convening spaces to have that dialogue. But you mentioned the issue of money. Is money scarce? I don't know. I believe we can somehow create new money if money is scarce. How? through leadership. You heard from the previous panel how we can be creative around expanding fiscal spaces of government, etc. So the conversations from top, from grassroots to grass tops have been, how do we expand the fiscal spaces? How do we get money from non-traditional spaces that we have not been knocking at before? And how do we use that money efficiently? And I'm sure you're going to hear more as we continue this conversation.
Well, I'd like to ask you how you do that in practice. How do you, to people, make the economic case for family planning?
Do you know what? It's simple. If everyone were to look at their phone right now, if I may, just look at your phone at some of the picture that you hit like, and think twice. What was made possible by family planning in that picture? What did family planning or access to contraception or access to information or the ability to plan your family? What it could be, maybe you are shopping at Harrods or on Fifth Avenue, right? Whatever has been made possible for me is an economic case at an individual level. And that's what we have done through Made Possible, because we have made it personal to every individual to tell their stories. But for governments, it has been that economic case that says for every dollar that you invest in family planning, you actually reap $8 more. That goes not only into women's pockets, but into families, into societies, into countries. And I think we've got here our Director of Non-Communicable Diseases from Indonesia who would attest to what family planning has done for the country in that return on investment. So we've convened dialogues with governments to make sure that case is actually loud and clear. We have partnered with Guttmacher and others in the research to make sure that case is actually authenticated. And more importantly for us, it has been making sure that in every space that FP 2030 occupies, we say the message. What can be made possible? What can be changed?
So you asked that question.
Precisely.
I'd love to turn to Dr. Nadia, who represents Indonesia's health department, health ministry. What do you feel that Indonesia is doing around this subject that's made a difference?
Yeah. Okay. I think first, if we talk about the family planning, it's not only the health issue, but it including the matter of rights and dignity and opportunity for women everywhere. And I think a lot of progress already made by expanding access to the family planning. And if we seen by having more access, what we learned from Indonesia, it's more that more women have the ability to make informed choice about their reproductive health. And of course, it will be one of tangible improvements for maternal health, gender equality, and social development. I think we have both experience between progress and a challenge. Today in Indonesia, like 62% of women with the reproductive age are using modern contraceptive methods. Yeah, because I think Indonesia, the third largest country in the world after China and India. So we really have to control our population. And of course, within a lot of the numbers, we still have like 12% women who still have unmet need. So of course, this one that's the women that we still remain without the services, and of course they need and deserve to have them more access on this.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Nadia. My family's from India, so I think we beat Indonesia on that right there. But George, you're with Bear, and you and I backstage were talking a little bit about in India, actually. And my family's from Kerala, from the south, which has an incredible family planning record. Tell me a little bit about why Bear is so invested. You work in low-income families, middle-class families. Why is Bear so interested in this topic?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, I think that because within the context of Bayer's DNA, really women's health is there. It's a part of who we are. We were one of the first companies in the world to market combined oral contraceptives, and there's a lot of long-acting materials that we've been able to put to market. And I think that's a part of it. But as it relates specifically to the low and middle income countries, the biggest challenge is getting access there. And so one of the things that Bayer is doing is we actually have capacity building programs that seek to activate domestic funding and also train and develop local healthcare professionals, community health workers, to make sure that women have access to informed and voluntary contraception and family planning. And what's really interesting about the programs that we support is that they are not based on the use of Bayer products. All that's required is that the broadest range of products be offered, so short-acting contraceptives and long-acting, and then beyond that, it really is up to the woman to make the choice that's right for her. And that's consistent with our ethos, that's consistent with our 100 million women goal, where we seek to reach 100 million women with access to modern contraception in the year 2030. We've reached 51 million last year, so halfway through the decade, halfway to the goal, but we still have a lot more work to go. And so with that being said, that's really why we're doing what we're doing, because as Dr. Samu mentioned, so much is possible when women are able to make their choices and fulfill potential on their terms.
And George, you grew up on the Mexico border.
Yes.
And you've actually seen what it's like when communities don't have access, the option of family planning. Give us a sense of what you see.
Yeah, sure. Well, where I grew up in Texas, along the Mexico-Texas border, America border. And what I saw there is it was a largely migrant community. It was, relatively low income. And I actually had a friend at the age of 13 get pregnant in junior high, and she carried the baby to term. And there were a lot of girls, I can't really say women because to me they're girls, that had children before they got out of high school. Very, very bright people who had an incredible future ahead of them, but because of lack of access, they had children, dropped out of high school, and even in university, I saw some friends get pregnant and drop out. And so it's the converse of what's possible is what could have been. And at least for me personally, and I think this permeates a lot of the folks here in this room and on the panel, it really is what can we do to make sure that every woman has a chance to fulfill her potential on her terms. And that, for me at least, that's what drives me, because I saw it firsthand, the impact that not having access had for us.
Because you're very passionate about this topic, absolutely, and I see it comes from personal oasis. Dr. Samu, this has really been a tough year for global funding across the board. And unfortunately, as we know, female-funded health initiatives often are the first to get cut. So what is your sense when we're living in this moment of how do we shift the narrative? How do we get those resources?
I think one of the most important issues, and thank you for that question, because everyone knows it has been tough. And where it has been tough, it has offered us an opportunity, first for the sector of reproductive health, the community, to meet people where they are. I think one of the most important drivers for change is to get out of your own echo chamber. And one of the things that FP 2030 and our partners, and by the way, both Indonesia is a FP 2030 commitment maker and Bayer is an FP 2030 commitment maker, is actually partnering to get to spaces where traditionally you wouldn't find people talking about family planning. So getting into spaces where people talk about climate, where people talk about business and women in tech, so that you can assure them what can be made possible if we all invest in family planning, not only for ourselves, for our communities, but for our countries, and getting the narrative right. Because when you look at businesses, if you want businesses to thrive, and I'm sure, Bayer, even for your own employees, you invest in reproductive health and family planning because you know it's good for business. So we know it's good for communities. We get out of our own echo chamber and get people where they are, because what family planning does, it makes that possible. But I think the issue is then where is the money going to come from? I think where we are partnering with philanthropy is get catalytic funding. So it's not like replacement funding. It's like catalytic funding that actually achieves more than it could have in the previous years, right?
Explain what that is.
So catalytic funding is where you are like, can my funding open up more? So for example, if you want to get more private sector involvement in a country, you want to fund the enabling environment for private sector to thrive, because in 2-3 years' time, you will have more private sector that is going to be involved. or an enabling environment for regulatory systems at a country level to get a company to do technology transfer, for example, to manufacture local commodities. That, for me, becomes catalytic funding. That otherwise wouldn't have made anything else possible. So the partnerships become different now that you are in a different funding environment. But again, even ordinary citizens, ordinary people can actually give to family planning. And I think through the family planning partnership across the world, we are trying to get platforms that enable that giving to family planning, and ensuring that on the other hand, there is accountability that ensures that your family planning dollar that you have given goes a longer mile, and not only that, you can see the result that it actually achieves when it's given at a country level. So we are doing more than we have done in the past to ensure that we reach every person in the world. And you know, when we are saying family planning makes so much more possible, we are not underestimating the transformative power of access to those choices that make many things possible. Because look at what the example that George has done. Has said the trajectory of many people changes when they don't have access. And we can change the world truly by this giving that we are actually articulating today.
Dr. Nadia, I want to ask you from a government standpoint, what have you found that works when you're trying to get public-private partnership, getting people on board for initiatives like this?
Before to that, I think in Indonesia, we have faced two challenges. The first one, young marriage, teenager, they even already, sometimes their parent already ask them to marriage once they already have a menstrual something, a cycle, and then it might be like 12 years old. And the other thing is the teenager who doesn't really have a choice to have a family planning contraceptive. So based on that situation, of course, first we need to have a strong political will, and of course the cross-sector collaboration, which you mentioned about involving the partners and the government collaboration. So with this, of course, I fully agree with how we use and mobilize any resources, because we are facing the fiscal and systemic constraint to although our national health insurance already covers some of the family planning, but again, for the young marriage or sometimes for the one who don't have an access on the national health insurance, they still need to have this kind of access. So that's why we are working in terms of the private, how really this more choice available for every woman in any condition. And then of course involvement of the private is not only we're talking about bringing more players into this delivering service, but of course including like religious leaders to have their involvement on this issue. So this become more a strong message into the community.
Yeah, it's, you know, I have to tell you, we spent an entire season on the hidden economics of remarkable women, looking at the power of male allyship in countries and how that makes a difference. George, you know, it's not just the United States that BEAR is invested in. They're all over in different countries. What are some of the lessons that you've walked away in trying to increase family planning in different countries?
Sure, the great question. Thank you. I think the biggest one is making sure that we have domestic ownership, local ownership, because that does a lot of things. Number one, we can adapt it to the local context. You know, as you mentioned, you know, having male allyship in certain countries is incredibly important to make things happen. In other countries, it's making sure that we're in the right language and using the right terminology. Even in English-speaking countries, having adolescent-type language that resonates with them is so key. We need to meet them where they're at. So I think that's a big part. Having it localized and owned locally. I think the second part is making sure that the local government is equally invested in developing and maintaining it. And so a lot of countries, a lot of cities have a line item for family planning and its commodities and what have you, but how much of that is actually being devoted to that? Sometimes it gets used in other very important ways. So I think making sure that it's devoted towards the family planning makes a huge difference. And then ultimately, it really is about making sure that it's owned locally, it is delivered locally, and it carries on so that after the intervention is over, after the donor funds are gone, you've built up that muscle memory of family planning and making sure that it's right for the local community, that it continues on long after the intervention is over.
So just dumping money into a country is not enough. You have to get the grassroots local
Absolutely.
efforts to be really intertwined so that the progress continues.
Exactly. It's that catalytic funding, if you will. If we bring in funding to to get things started and make sure that it's set up in a way that it continues long after the intervention, it's going to be successful long term.
Dr. Semo, I want to end with you because there's a fabulous campaign that FP 2030 has launched, which is called Made Possible. And it's looking at family members who have had access to contraception and what is made possible. Tell us a little bit more about this and how this came about.
Fantastic. And thank you, George, for mentioning adolescents and young people. I really wanted to just underscore that because at the core of what FP 2030 does is investing in young people. Not just because, the cliche is they're the future, but it's because they are the core of what we do every day. Do you know, I am a doctor. I managed to have more than one degree, and many of you, I'm sure, you managed to have more than one degree. I managed to travel the world. I managed to do things and shop even, some of those mentors that are like, don't buy shoes, buy buildings. I'm like, I will buy shoes as well. So many things, right, that you do in your life. Why? Because so much can be made possible when you have access to contraception. But because of my own story, and I decided later on that, let me have one daughter who, maybe when I'm dying, she'll hold my hand. So I've got one. But I think what is important in my own story and changing the trajectory of my own family was, how do I make this possible for thousands and millions of other women out there who may not have that access? And I'm not taking it for granted. And I'm not saying that this is only important in Bamako or in Bulawayo. I'm saying it's important in Berlin in as much as it's important in London. Access to contraception changes one's life story. So Made Possible by Family Planning is a campaign that was conceptualized by the family planning community since last year, and it's got three main objectives: to galvanize voice. Voice as in, let's change the narrative of family planning. It is not a luxury. It's core to development. Second part is money, right? Let's get more money around this. We put a number, 1 billion. We are trusting that George and the government of Indonesia will fund that. But anyway, 1 billion around the campaign. And then the last one is ensuring that we do get people to tell their stories. So please, partner with us. I've got a team that is here. We've got partners who have signed on. I know there's TICO. We are doing innovative funding models already that we are going to announce more at ICFP. It's a campaign for the community, for everyone to leash on and say what can be made possible by family planning. It's not solving everything, but many things, can be made possible by family planning. So that's the campaign that we have launched, and that is ongoing and has been launched in about 15 countries across the world at national and sub-national level. Is galvanizing partners who have signed on to the campaign to say it's made possible by family planning. More important, at a time that we live in right now, where it's anti-rights, it's anti-choice, it's anti-women, it's anti-family planning, it's anti-science, and many things that we believe in.
I love that, finding a good solution for an important problem. Dr. Samu, George, and Dr. Nadia, thank you very much for joining us.
Please now welcome to the stage Bayer Chief Health Equity Officer, Dr. Klaus Runge, Society for Women's Health Research President and CEO, Catherine Schubert, and HERS Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jessica Shepard.
About this because yesterday, as I was prepping for this, it was about midnight or something, and I crawled into bed. So hot. It was so hot. I don't know if it's perimenopause or menopause, but it was sure something different. I know most of you in this audience know what I'm talking about. So I want to kick it off and sort of talk about something where half of the population deal with. And, you know, it's a big struggle that I feel just only recently people are really focusing attention towards. Jessica, I want to start with you at the basics. You came out with a book called Generation M. It's a guide for women navigating menopause. What do you think is one of the most important thing that women can do who are entering this point right now?
I think, you know, what we have lacked in society, even in healthcare, you know, as a physician, is the conversation. And I think when we think of menopause, perimenopause, hot flashes at night, is that it's so somewhat demoralizing or stigmatized that a lot of women did not want to talk about it. But society also didn't allow for the luxury for women to bring that to the stage. And even healthcare providers, we really didn't have the best tools that we have now, or how to actually appreciate the entire journey of women as they start to go through this process, because it has so much stigma attached. And also from a research perspective, we really don't have a lot that lends to what are the best tools, why. Obviously, there is, was a study that was done 20 years ago that pretty much halted how we thought of hormones. So there's a lot that goes to it, and it's so multi-layered and complex. But ultimately, where we are right now, like you said, we're seeing more attention towards it, is it actually started more from the public sector of women who were saying, we've had enough, we want answers, we want to feel better. And that really drove into consumerism and products, where it really pushed the needle towards, we have to do something now.
I have to ask you, because you dropped it just now, about hormone replacement therapy. What is the final word on this?
The final word is that anything that when you think about a condition or a disease state is always risk versus benefit. When we think of menopause, it is not typical of how we think, maybe 30% of, the population may get it. Every woman will go through menopause. So you can't escape it. You can't hide from it. Obviously, everyone's symptoms are going to vary in frequency and severity. But at the end of the day, hormones, we were born with it. And so now that there's a natural decline of it, to me, when you look at risk versus benefit, the benefits clearly outweigh in research the risk. So I think that needs to be a nuanced conversation, but we are very much in the present state of, we know the benefits and what that means, not only for symptoms like the hot flashes and so many of the other ones, but longevity. How are we going to live our lives in our 70s, 80s, and 90s?
I remember my mom 20 years ago didn't do HRT because it was just so new, and she's a nurse and didn't, but she drank a lot of soy milk. And I'm reading recently that in Japan, it's not that they don't go through menopause, but it's a different perspective. Different experience. High fish, Joey. I'm not advocating. I'm not a doctor, so don't. But
She's like, this is not medical
advice.
This is
not me, but I did have to tell you that. Klaus, I want to ask you, because we talked about male allyship. So I want to ask you, menopause and being in this space is something deeply personal. How did you get interested in this topic and become an advocate for it? Because it's not personal.
It is very personal.
It is very personal, but
I have earned my seat on stage because my woman actually goes through this at the moment for a while, and I can tell you it's really amazing what the odyssey looks like that a woman goes through. Yeah, and we're not talking about a country that we live in where you would say healthcare services are at a low level. So I can tell you, her brain fogs are mine. Her night awakenings are mine. And when we step back, working in the pharmaceutical industry, also the question is, how good are the services that we render to women on this globe? And it's fair to say that many women live at lower quality in terms of health and well-being for a longer period of time than they would have to. And when I entered this beautiful building this morning from Fifth Avenue, I saw Atlas shouldering the world, It probably is a heavier lift these days, but if you think about what women carry in this world, again, the question is, how can it be that women who go through really devastating periods in their life, and menopause can be one, are not able to get the help they need? So what needs to happen, just not only for these individuals, but also for the benefit of society? Because in industry nations, women who are peri- and postmenopausal represent the largest, fastest growing workforce, share of the workforce. And given the aging of the population, that means an issue to productivity in industry nations. We have done some research with foreign policy that shows that there's a lot of loss of productivity around $10 billion in Germany alone. And that's why also the company I work for, Bayer, has started to think about how to better help women cope with this period of their life. It's not a disease, yeah? But it's a real challenge also in the workplace, as women report up to 8 times higher low workability. So, and that's why also we started as an employer to listen what women need and to start to, let's say, introduce this into policies in the company. But of course, our core business is R&D and producing medicines, and we do have an asset which will come to market soon, which is a non-hormonal alternative to treat.
How soon is soon?
Very soon. It's been approved in a number of countries around the globe already.
That's great.
The approval is still pending in the US, but there is discussions. It's also fair to say that there's a competitor who has a product already on the market in the same category. So that means there's alternatives, and the healthcare systems need to make sure that women have the choices.
That's great. That's a little bit of breaking news. I have not heard that anywhere, so that's nice to know. Catherine, I want to ask you, you represent the Society for Women's Health Research, and you've dug into this about menopausal age, the symptoms, the experiences. Tell me what you have learned.
Yes, well, I've learned a lot personally. I also am perimenopausal. It's not a secret. I have the brain fog, I have the hot flashes, all of it. But at the Society for Women's Health Research, we started several years ago digging into the gaps in research, really thinking about where do we need more. Here in the U.S., the National Institutes of Health actually didn't track research on menopause until just a couple of years ago, so we had no baseline, number one. Number two, we are hearing an outcry from women, and not every clinician is like Dr. Shepard and knows about menopause. And so one of the biggest things that we do is educate clinicians and women themselves about what they need to know in order to approach perimenopause and menopause and do it in a healthy way and for longevity, to your point. The other thing that we looked at was women in the workplace. And so to this point about women being, it's like over 40% of the workforce is women of menopausal age. And just to clarify, the average age of menopause, at least here in the US, is 51. Symptoms can show up, 10 years earlier? They can go longer. It's really an individualized issue. But women in the workforce are suffering. These are women in the primes of their careers, making decisions like, I'm not going to go for that promotion. I'm going to leave my job. I can't think. It's not just I'm getting warm at night, right? It's the brain fog that we are really seeing as being the number one concern for women, lack of sleep. So 2 out of 5 women told us that they were going to leave their jobs. So we created a workplace guide for women and for managers in the workplace, because 38% of managers did not want to talk about it. Not that they didn't desire to speak about it, but they didn't understand enough about it. So we want to help them have these conversations so that if you are a woman going into this transition, we do a lot of support now, thankfully, for women who are growing their families, who are pregnant, lactation support. There's not a lot up until the last couple of years to support women in this transition of their life. So we're learning a lot. The other piece that's really critical is this risk of chronic conditions later on in life. So this is an inflection point for women. It's a life stage where you have an opportunity to address things like cardiac disease, bone health, even Alzheimer's disease, we are learning. So it's actually a really important point in a woman's life that we really need to be doing better at looking at.
And you actually have tips for the workforce of how to be what you call menopause inclusive. What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have it broken down, and all of these materials are free and available on our website, swhr.org. So we have it broken down by physically intensive work. So that looks a little bit different. It might be a uniform that has to be made of a different material. It might be additional breaks. We have emotionally intensive work, which might mean that you need even more breaks, or you might need a flexible work schedule. And then if you're someone like me who mostly sits behind a computer all day, something more flexible, maybe you call in and you're allowed to take some leave if you did not get a good night's sleep. So there's a lot of that, but there's also how do you approach this conversation with your employer? What I personally would love to see is the employers like Bayer and others sort of starting the conversation themselves instead of putting the burden on, you as the woman to say, I need to make some changes, or there are a few things that I might need. So if you reverse that, I think it will all be better off.
In addition to your great research, the team at Foreign Policy Analytics, I don't know if you guys are familiar, they do a great job in digging into the research of stuff. And they had this great report that I was reading that some of you might be interested in. It's called The Health and Economic Impacts of Menopause. And what they found, one of the big challenges is that there really aren't a lot of treatment options available. That's why, Klaus, I got very excited when you said what you said, because there's like nothing out there. And what the report said that there's really a lack of incentives for companies. So if you're a company and you're not incentivized, I mean, this is a business after all. I'm just curious, Klaus, what are you finding that could mobilize and incentivize pharmaceutical companies to spend more R&D around this?
At the end of the day, the question is also what's the willingness to pay of healthcare systems for certain treatments and offerings. And I think that especially when you think about helping women through this period in their lives, a lot more has to be done. I think also healthcare decision makers haven't recognized what the impact is that it just not only has on the quality of life of the affected woman, but also on society. So, and the issue that you face as a pharmaceutical manufacturer or R&D-based company, if you think about reimbursement systems like in Europe, you would launch a product and you would, to start with, be compared with what's available on the market price-wise, and hormone therapies, which are pretty effective, but where you still have to do the risk-benefit assessment very thoroughly, these are like super low-price genericized products. So it is very difficult to convince decision makers to really pay an increment for additional opportunities. And I have to say, I mean, there's also an equality component to it. I live in a country where Viagra gets reimbursed a certain quantity per month for men. So the question is that fair, given that women who sometimes are contraindicated with HRT, so if you have induced vasomotor symptoms, for example, due to breast cancer and post-breast cancer therapies, you're not allowed to take hormones because you don't want to have a relapse. So, and that's where little options are available, and where this new class of medicines that our competitor and we will bring to market gives choices. But at the end of the day, we can only make it available if there's a sufficient return on the investment, of course. And that's what we're trying also to achieve in the discussions with healthcare systems around the globe.
Dr. Jessica, there's so much stigma around menopause, and still, I would say a little bit of shame of like acknowledging, right? I mean, a generation before us, you would not talk about this. My mom's generation, my God, she's probably watching at home thinking, I can't believe this is what she's doing today. What works in really trying to destigmatize?
I think it really has to come from all different avenues. Like even hearing this conversation over here is healthcare systems have to understand that women matter, right? It really needs to be simplified in how women are viewed, where their value is. If you look really at the healthcare system, the value is for a woman around her fertility years. Yeah. And after that, it's kind of like, oh, well, just go over there. Thanks so much for your call and duty, and go to that little closet over there and stay in there. But when you look at economics of it, obviously, and women are really the nucleus of their family and the community, and they really shoulder a lot, whether that's through the emotional aspect of the community, but also now we're seeing in the economics of globally that they do fund a lot of what goes on with the economics of the world. So sometimes you may even need to bring it to the fundamentals of what does this mean for money, or where is value, or are women being heard? And women typically live longer than men, but they live longer years in poorer health. So even when you look at the numbers of that, then you can actually utilize women themselves to speak up for themselves and use community to advocate, where we want better quality of life and we want better for ourselves, especially when we're thinking of older ages. You had mentioned some of them before: dementia, osteoporosis, when we think of muscle mass, when we think of heart disease, still the #1 killer of women. A lot of these long-term diseases and consequences actually have to do with mid-age. and where the chronicity of these diseases start to develop. And then over the course of years, since women aren't being taken care of at that pivotal kind of flux of their life medically, is that we start to see then women show up with those diseases later on in life. So really, to answer your question, there is no one right answer on who's supposed to destigmatize, but it really requires men being advocates. It really requires, when we do come up with drugs that are non-hormonal, can help with hot flashes, and also for those who can take hormones, that we make that of importance. But it really needs to be something that everyone is involved in, because no one person or no one group is going to change that kind of importance kind of meter towards this is something that has to be done right now. And I really do think it is of some urgency, because the numbers are there. The research is there. So it's not like we don't know. So what are we going to do to change that from what we know and doing better?
Catherine, when we talked a little bit about incentivizing the pharmaceutical companies, but what about incentivizing the workforce? What could be done for employers to make them think about menopause differently?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, just thinking about it, right? The actual act of thinking about it. So we always encourage employers to take a look at what policies they have in place, what benefits they are currently offering through the lens of women's health, of course, and this midlife woman, right? So they probably already have benefits and other sort of accommodations, if you will, available that could be applied to midlife women and menopause. So that's the first one. The other thing is they really need to be thinking about their workforce and sort of see the light, if you will. So rather than reinvesting in new people who need to be trained when their seasoned professional leaves, they really need to be thinking about, and this happened in the UK, right? The reason why the UK has done such a great job of thinking about women in the workforce is because they were in a workforce crisis. They did not have new employees coming in who were women, and all of their women were leaving. So they had to do something about it. And so I think we're seeing this trend, although we are now watching sort of employers step up into the space to be able to really incentivize, if you will. We like to say accommodations, but it's not quite that critical of a word, I think. You know, it's just really thinking about what do you have available. Is it, again, a flexible work schedule, a different uniform, some different time off to go have what I would call maybe a menopause or midlife women's appointment, a well visit, which doesn't exist, by the way, and probably should. But really just thinking about it from a comprehensive approach and then marketing it that way, because I don't think they're really thinking about it from that perspective.
Are there any examples of like workforces or policies that you feel where they've gotten it right, or kind of rethinking I know it's still so early.
Working on it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think what Bayer's doing with their workforce, there's other, quite frankly, pharma companies who are doing this pretty well. I know Bank of America had done a study related to this, and so they're looking at it. I do what I'm calling a roadshow to employer health coalitions, and so even smaller businesses are thinking about this. Even organizations that you wouldn't think of as employing mostly women. So think of the Great Lakes Water Authority, which is a little random in Michigan. You would not think they have a lot of women working for them. They don't, but they insure a lot of women, a lot of spouses. And so they're thinking about programming. So it's not workforce policy necessarily, but it is health benefits. And what can they do to offer who they are covering benefits related to midlife health and women's health? It's fascinating. But more to come. We're hoping to see more menopause-friendly workplaces.
Yeah, and talking about it gets other companies to think about it. As we wrap up, I want to do just one rapid-fire question to all of you, which is, what's one thing about menopause you wish more people knew? And what's another thing that really gives you hope when I think a lot of people feel a little bit lost and feel like there isn't hope? We'll start with Dr. Jessica, and Klaus, give you the last word.
This was the quick fire question?
That was a quick.
This could have been the whole panel. No, I see women in my office every day, and every story is different.
Yeah.
And what I would say is internally, or what we're told externally of this chapter in our lives, many times we see it as something that is over or ending. And I really would encourage women to understand that this can be the best chapter of your life. We really do have a lot more to offer. We're really, from a healthcare provider perspective, really gearing ourselves up to be able to talk to women and treat them in the way that they need to, and offering them, the choices that can be done. So I would say, keep hope. we are getting there, and also the emotional aspect and resilience that comes during this. I really encourage women to know that when they don't feel like they're themselves, that they are not alone, and to find that support, whether it's a healthcare provider, whether it's community, because you are not alone. I see women every day who are going through this. So I know that we're going to do better, and I am here to be that fierce advocate for perimenopausal and menopausal women.
I love that you're that advocate, because people, yes, please, a round of applause for that. Such an important, I was in a meeting, and there's a woman who I know is going through menopause and was struggling in the meeting, but if we don't talk about it, then she's just written off as some crazy lady, right? But anyway, such a great point you're making. Catherine.
I agree. It's not a death sentence. I really do think people traditionally think of this as like the end of your life that an elderly woman is going through, and that's not it, right? And so I think that's one thing that I have learned that I think is important for everybody to keep in mind. That's not it. And I find hope in conversations like these, right? We are seeing this conversation go much more mainstream than we ever have before. And because I am a policy advocate, I'm based in DC, it's a bipartisan issue. And I see a lot of hope in that at a time when sometimes it's a little difficult to find hope in places, but I think this is a winning issue that people seem to care about and want to do something about.
Especially in Washington.
Yes.
So that's
hard to get anything done.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think if I had a couple of wishes, the first one would be, I think menopause care should be integrated into primary care. So what we see in interactions also with a lot of service providers or physicians is they haven't been trained appropriately. So the curricula need to be overworked. I think it should really be a routine capability of primary care physicians to deal with it. Yeah, because otherwise, imagine you're a woman meeting your gatekeeper, so to say, who has little, let's say, knowledge and idea of what to do. Yeah, so that's one thing. So training healthcare professionals. Secondly, I think we need national menopause strategies. I think UK is a good example. Spain has done some good work in it. We see movements here in the US and Oregon, for example. So let's make these examples public and invite people to follow this path. Yeah? So I think that's also important. And then thirdly, I think it also is about funding. Yeah? So physicians need to be paid for the services appropriately. And I think the same holds true for innovation in this space, be it services or be it pharmaceuticals. So these would be the three things: integration into primary care, national strategies, and a system who's willing to fund better care for women in need.
I love that, Klaus. I really do. I want to thank you all. Thank you. Dr. Jennifer, Catherine, and Klaus, thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Thank you, guys.
And now, please welcome to the stage U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen for a conversation with FP's Andrew Solinger.
Welcome, Senator Shaheen. First woman elected governor of New Hampshire, first woman in American history to serve as both governor and senator, and first woman to lead the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We are honored to have you here at Her Power. How about another round of applause for those accolades?
Let me just correct you a little bit, though.
Uh-oh.
I'm the top Democrat, so I'm the first woman to either be chair or ranking. Sadly, I'm not chair. I'm the ranking member.
Ranking member. I stand corrected. Sorry about that. Still very auspicious and fantastic. I wanted to kick off. I know we only have a few minutes, so I want to dive right into it. You have been a very, very busy person today, as we were just discussing. I've met with various heads of state, al-Shara, the new head of Syria, leaders from Lebanon, Korea. I'd just be curious if this is your last discussion point of the day. What are your takeaways from your meetings today? What gives you hope? And feel free to go in the other direction if so.
I was in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon in August. And I am excited about the opportunity we have in the Middle East. Very upset, as I know most Americans are, about what's happening in the war in Gaza. But we have an opportunity in Syria and Lebanon that we have not had in decades, particularly in Syria. As many of you know, President al-Shura is speaking to the General Assembly. It's the first Syrian leader who's spoken here since 1967. Despite some of the concerns about his background, since he has taken over as interim president in Syria, he has been moving in a positive direction. He's getting support from other Middle East leaders and from the United States, and I think we have an opportunity for a Syria that no longer is controlled by Iran or Russia, that is inclusive and is bringing in the other religious groups and other ethnic groups who are part of Syria, that is moving the country in a way that could be a model for the Middle East. Now, a lot needs to happen for it to be successful, but we need to be paying attention and watching and supporting what's going on there. So I am hopeful about what's happening in the Middle East. And in Lebanon, the same thing. They elected a president for the first time in 2 years. They have a council of ministers and a prime minister that is addressing corruption in the country. They are disarming Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon and making some very positive changes that are going to be good for the region. And I think supporting them is also very important. So I met with President Aoun from Lebanon, who also had positive reports about progress that they're making.
That's fantastic. And the administration seems interested in these regions, obviously in the region, but in these countries, and creating a new reality on the ground for them. So it's an area of bipartisan unanimity, it seems.
And as you all might expect, I don't agree with the Trump administration on a lot of their foreign policy, but I do agree with his position to lift the Caesar sanctions on Syria. I think that was an important decision, and he's moving forward on that, and there is bipartisan support in the Senate to do that.
We don't hear a lot of that, so that is fantastic to hear from you. Let's focus a little bit on some of what we talk about here at Her Power, and specifically on the Women, Peace, and Security legislation that you championed back in 2017.
Correct.
Is that right? And to refresh for everyone, this prioritizes the meaningful inclusion of women in foreign policy, national security, and diplomatic efforts, and this includes peace negotiations, crisis interventions, and the like. A lot has how do you see this law evolving? A lot is changing here in the United States and abroad. How can this law remain relevant, and what needs to change to continue down the path?
Well, let me first say that this is the result of an initiative taken by the UN at the beginning of this century, in the early 2000s, to recognize how important it is to empower women, because we know that countries that empower women tend to be more stable. We know that women give back more to their communities and to their countries than men. I'm speaking on averages now. I don't want any men in the audience and watching to get upset. And we know that when women are at the negotiating table, when conflicts are being discussed, that if there's a negotiated settlement, that it's 35% likely to last 15 years or longer when women are at the table. So this is foreign policy that we know is important, and it works. So the United States in 2017 was the first country to legislatively pass a Women, Peace, and Security law during the first Trump administration. The president signed it. They developed a plan to implement it. It has been adopted by a lot of our combatant commands in the military, and it continues to be on the books. Sadly, the current administration seems to think that women, peace, and security is about DEI, not about the difference that women make. DEI is another topic. We probably won't get to that today. But this is a law that works. And as I said, it gives us an advantage, particularly over our adversaries. One of the reasons that our military leaders have embraced this, Secretary Hegseth notwithstanding, is that they know it gives us an edge. It gives us an edge over China and Russia because we include women. So the law remains on the books. It is funded in the appropriations bill, the defense appropriations bill that has passed the committee. And if we can actually get an appropriations process and keep the government funded, it will be funded and it will continue to make a difference. And I think it's important for us to continue to make the case that women at the table, women as part of negotiations, make a difference. And we need to continue to be clear about that. So
that's great. Let's touch on something that I know is also near and dear to you. Around the world, we have seen a step backward on women's rights, especially attacks on reproductive health access. And there is, some of this is being promulgated by the U.S. There's been a lot of news about...
A lot of it is being promulgated by the U.S. Okay. Let's be clear. Come on.
I stand corrected again. There's been a lot of news about the destruction of contraceptives that were purchased by U.S. aid located in Belgium, bound for Africa. Reports that they've been destroyed, reports, wait a minute, they haven't been destroyed. I know this is something that you've been taking close to heart. Can you tell us what is going on here?
Well, we can't get a clear answer from the State Department, so that's part of the problem. But I can tell you that I sent a staff member to Belgium in early August, and what she found is that the contraceptives that were there were still good. They were going to be good for several years in the future. There was no reason to destroy them, and that not only do we have NGOs who have offered to take them and distribute them, but the government of Belgium has also offered to do that. So the fact that this administration would destroy contraceptives that could make such a difference for women in so many places where they don't have access to it is just unforgivable. And not only is it a waste of about $10 million that the taxpayers have paid for, but they're also going to spend $160,000 to destroy them if they do that. So I hope that everyone, if you haven't spoken out about this, that you will, because it's a travesty.
Thank you for updating us on that and for paying attention to what could just be a footnote otherwise in some of what's been going on. So we do appreciate that.
Let me just add, sadly, it's not just contraceptives. We're also seeing this administration do the same thing with food aid. And even the meals that are designed to help babies who are starving to death. They have allowed that those commodities to be destroyed as well. Commodities that have been paid for, that are sitting in warehouses, that are going bad because this administration refuses to distribute them to the people who need them because they eliminated virtually all foreign assistance programs.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you one more point, and that is, what is the role of multilateral organizations in this environment, organizations like the UN, and what will happen after whatever speech is given on Thursday by the President at the UN about the UN?
Well, I'm glad that the Senate finally confirmed an ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz. He was confirmed on Friday. I think that's important that we have an ambassador here. And look, one of the things that there has been bipartisan agreement on that I think the Trump administration has also supported is the idea that the biggest threat to America economically and militarily is China. That the People's Republic of China poses a real threat. And one of the things we're seeing in a pullback from international organizations, whether it's the UN or various rule-setting bodies, is that if we are not at the table, it's China who is going to set the rules of the road. And that is not going to be done in America's interests and probably not in the interests of most democracies in the world. So it doesn't make any sense that we are pulling back and giving this opening to China to take over and include additional people and leadership positions at international bodies.
Okay, extra last question. You talked about bipartisan cooperation in reference to Syria. You on Friday introduced the Shadow Fleets initiative with Senator Jim Risch. chair of foreign relations, to focus on Russian oil shipments. In a polarized political environment, cross-party cooperation is increasingly rare. What's an effective strategy for continuing down this road to try and make sure we're working together, not just against each other?
I think bipartisanship when it comes to foreign policy is really important. It's important to continue policy from one administration to the next. And it's important as we look at things that I think are real priorities for us in the United States, one of which is supporting Ukraine in this unprovoked war with Russia. And one of the ways that Senator Risch and I are doing that is by supporting legislation that would go after the shadow fleet that's allowing Russia to continue to fund its war against Ukraine on oil revenue. So that's the goal of the legislation. And, you know, I sort of think about it as psychology 101. The more you see somebody, the more you talk to them, the more they engage, they have to engage with you, the more likely you are to figure out ways that you can get along and do things that find common goals. And I think that's important for us to do, even when we disagree, that there are areas that we should look for common ground, because that builds on itself then. Success builds on success. And I think that's one of the things that I have tried to focus on as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Well, it's great to hear that you've seen success on that, and I think those are words to live by. As much as we might get upset or disagree with what's happening, it's important to keep those conversations going and find common ground. Senator Shaheen, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you all very much.
Please now welcome Tony Roma's CEO, Mina Hawk, to the stage.
Mina Hawk, CEO of Tony Roma's. Tough to follow the senator, but we are very excited. I'm very excited in particular to have you here, because we've had a lot of discussions today with top-level government officials, heads of NGOs, organizations around the world that focus on women and women's health. But we've not really talked to a lot of commercial representatives about how they do what they do and opportunities for women in business. So you're bringing a really cool and unique perspective to Her Power. So thanks for joining us on that. And I was hoping that you would start out by telling us a little bit about, just in a sentence or two, how you got to be CEO of Tony Roma's. And for those that don't know Tony Roma's, maybe an explanation of what Tony Roma's is.
Absolutely. So Tony Roma's is a global franchisor. It's a barbecue ribs joint with presence in 5 continents. So Tony Roma's once upon a time used to have hundreds of locations in the United States, and we are known for our ribs since 1972. My path to Tony Roma's, it's probably one of the most unusual paths ever. I'm a lawyer by profession, a practicing attorney who still practices law. I practice law like immigration, litigation. I do practice corporate law, and I found myself in an unusual position to review the due diligence of the Tony Roma's acquisition in the middle of the pandemic. And as a result, I think I gained trust of the stakeholders. Somehow I found myself here.
And the stakeholders, a private equity firm or another company?
A foreign investor who wanted to buy Tony Roma's in the middle of the pandemic, and our honorable boards of directors, and I was an outside general counsel. And as a attorney, you get a different perspective of a company, and I think which is what the company needed at that point to right the ship.
Now, Tony Roma's operates a franchising model,
right.
And I'd be interested to hear and share with the audience a little bit, what are the opportunities for women in running a ribs joint? I mean, I would think that's not the conventional path that a woman entrepreneur would seek to pursue.
See, that's a great question, because most of the people would actually think that this is, like, especially women, that I probably cannot run this ribs joint. And I'm going to give you data. From our internal statistics, we only have 0.02% ownership of women franchisees. And I would like to change that. And part of the reason is it's such a capital heavy build out cost. And that deters women because it's one of the challenges is access to the capital. And there are not many ecosystems that advises women how to be a franchisee. Sometimes you see that there are a lot of women who are running franchises, but it's more like learning centers or daycare centers as opposed to a restaurant chain. And I'm going to share a story. When I became the CEO of Tony Roma's, the first woman in the 53-year history, my predecessor came to me and told me everyone is sending email, everyone meaning all the other franchisees, and asking who is that woman. So they did not want to know about my credentials, my quality, but the first thing that made an impression was who is that woman, because it just was completely an uncharted path for the company. And that's what I want to change. I think there are many women out there who would be absolutely great franchisees because we have great women operators in our system.
So how can we shift perceptions about women owning franchises like this and generally being entrepreneurs to create more pathways to encourage them to undertake and enter into these businesses?
As an industry, I think we need to have more conversation, and we definitely need to create more access to capital. We need to have build out of our brands that are more friendly for people to at least consider that, yes, I can operate it. And I'm working on that for Tony Roma's. Tony Roma's used to be a 10,000 square feet restaurant to where we now have models that starts from 700 square feet and above. So if we help women in terms of reducing the franchise fee, giving access to capital, educating others that, yes, you can be a franchisee, because I see my operators are a woman and they're doing a wonderful job.
That's great. How about the role of mentorship networks and the like? And I'd actually be interested to hear a little bit about your mentorship network and how you came to this role. It's a fantastic story, how you came to Tony Roma's. Who was your role model?
My role model as an attorney, I always say it's Justice Ginsburg. And the reason I say Justice Ginsburg, because I really looked up to her, how she balanced her, personal life and her professional career. And I have a story to share about that. My husband is also an attorney, and as a student in Georgetown Law, he walked by Justice Ginsburg's husband, Professor Martin Ginsburg's office, and he saw an invitation card. And the invitation card read out, Justice Ginsburg and Mrs. Ginsburg, meaning whoever invited them, they thought her husband is the justice. So that's where we need to change the narrative. And I'm sure, each one of you who's present in the room today, you encounter these type of situations, which is why we need to make this more mainstream part of our conversation to see, yes, we're leaders. We're not just women leaders. Yes, we're leaders. We're not just power, woman, her power. We're powerful.
I like that. I like that a lot. So, and we're not to get political at all, but you're an immigrant.
Yes, absolutely.
And immigrants are important in the economy in the U.S., but particularly important in the food business. And I'm wondering how Tony Roma's and its franchisees are navigating the environment that we're in right now, in which there's a lot of pressure on those workers.
Most of our operators in the United States right now, they're immigrants. And they had the American dream. They wanted to buy a franchise like Tony Roma's and build not only one Tony Roma's, multiple Tony Roma's, and generational wealth. Immigrants who come to the United States, they embrace this country as a home. They don't think as they will be kept away, and they embrace it. And I see it every day through the lens of my franchise partners. And the current landscape, yes, it does create a lot of trepidation. There is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the labor force. Where are you going to get employees? There is a lot of apprehensiveness right now. But how about the long-term value of immigrants? I think that's what's missing from the conversation. It's not about just paying a one-time fee for an immigrant to get pathway to United States. How about the fact, what do immigrants spend in here? It's the generation after generation. Can you create a long-term value of the generations that will end up staying in the United States? That cannot be replaced.
There's an ROI there to that population. That's a really great point. So you're going down this path a little bit, and I'd be curious to know, how can governments, U.S. government or any government, financial institutions, industry leaders, reduce regulatory barriers, other barriers, financial barriers, to make entrepreneurship more accessible to women. And you gave us some examples for Tony Roma's, what you're focused on, what you're going to be working on. How about thinking up a little bit larger, the U.S. and globally in particular? How can we bring those barriers down? Any suggestions?
I'm a big advocate of education, and education does not mean only obtaining degrees, but education about systems and processes, how to obtain license, how to obtain permits. And we need to put out genuine knowledge out there, because sometimes it's all these bureaucratic hurdles that may stop, someone to consider entrepreneurship. And overall, as a population, I think we're seeing a trend where people are considering to be an entrepreneur because of technology, because of the flexibility they want in their life. I think we need to, educate the population that what's out there in terms of funding, what's out there in terms of the regulatory requirements, the licenses, the permits. Sometimes that takes a long time.
Yes.
And I think as a community, multiple stakeholders, we can have those discussions, and that will spread the knowledge we need to create entrepreneurs and businesses that will be sustainable.
That's fantastic. Well, Mina, really appreciate your sharing your insights on, first of all, your story on Tony Roma's, what you're trying to do there, the opportunity for women entrepreneurs, what we can do to help accelerate that trend. And it's really inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing that story and changing our thinking on entrepreneurship. And we'll all go get ribs at Tony Roma's at a store near us soon.
Yep,
Please thank
you.
Mina.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you.
Please.
Next, please welcome to the stage Core Africa CEO Liz Fanning, Core Africa Rwanda Country Director Estoki Sezibera, and Core Africa Malawi alumna Chisomo Kamlopa Nsulu, for a conversation with FP's Executive Vice President Alison Carlson.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you and good afternoon. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I'm absolutely delighted that you are carving out some time on a busy UNGA week for this really important conversation. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to have three incredible women leaders up here on stage with me to share a little bit more about their experience and how we can all learn from it. We have a short amount of time, so I'd just love to dig in. And Liz, start with you.
Okay.
So you started Core Africa 14 years ago, I believe it is now. Can you set the stage and tell us a little bit about the origin story? What made you focus on volunteerism as a meaningful instrument for change and for economic development, particularly in Africa?
Sure, thank you for the question. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco in the mid-1990s. Any Peace Corps volunteers in the room? See, we have a couple, there's always a few. I served in the High Atlas Mountains in a small village. It was an incredibly transformative experience for me. And young Moroccans would ask me if they could be Peace Corps volunteers so they could help their country. And I had to say, no, I'm sorry, it's only for Americans. So the question dogged me for really more than 20 years. I found my way back into international development. I became quite cynical, actually, and I started to really believe that we need to listen more. And so I took the Peace Corps model, Peace Corps for Africans, but we differ from Peace Corps in that we don't have sectors. We train the volunteers in human-centered design through a 6-week pre-service training program, and they go to their sites with no pre-existing agenda. That's key to our model, to who we are, to our value of listening. And they serve for a year. They implement a small-scale, high-impact project with their community that's owned by their community. And then they have the chance to serve again in another Core Africa country. But where they serve is far away from home in their own country the first year. It's about getting out of your comfort zone and having that transformative experience of service, which leads to professional opportunity.
I'd like to pick up on that for a second. You know, in so many conversations about economic development, there is a very, very keen focus on formal job creation. And I'm curious why, in light of the context of economic growth, development, why you really want to shine a light on volunteerism specifically.
I think the experience of volunteerism gives you the skills and the experiences that employers are looking for. It gives you the opportunity, like I said, to get out of your comfort zone, but it teaches you, we train them in the human-centered design, which is the facilitation skills. They learn asset-based community development, which is about development. You get the understanding of poverty that you can only get from living it. You get empathy, you get all sorts of professional skills. Through doing the project, they do a budget for the first time, they do a proposal, they manage expectations of their community. They go through that whole process, and it really is an empowering experience for the young volunteers. They're just like Peace Corps volunteers. They're recently out of college, usually before they get on their family and career track. They take a year, they go far from home, and they give back. But while they give back, they get.
Great.
Yes.
I'd love to turn to both of you, Estoki and Chisomo, to hear a little bit more about your experience and also your work in leadership now. So Estoki, turning to you first, you're presently running the largest Core Africa program in Rwanda. If you can tell us a little bit more about what that looks like. My understanding is it's 75% run by women.
Yes.
What does that model look like, and what are the kind of projects that you're working on?
Thank you for the question. In Rwanda, currently we have 155 volunteers, and 75% of those are female. So when we deploy the volunteers, we tell them just go and be yourself, go and live with the communities, just be a child in that community. So their mandate is not to go and do things, just go listen to people and do what they need to be done. So currently we are implementing many projects, but to start with, we empower the volunteers through empowering with the listening skills, being able to be empathetic. For those are university graduates who think they have it all. So if they have to go and work with the community, they have to make sure they are humble enough to be able to listen and facilitate. So currently we are doing a kind of different ranges of projects with the communities, but all those projects are actually chosen and identified by the communities. Through the listening, the facilitation skills that the volunteers have, they are able to come up with different solutions to their own issues. And with that, whatever we implement with the people is more sustainable. So ownership is key in Core Africa. Making sure people are the architect of their own development is also key. I think that's the model we're implementing if you look at it. Community development, having the people at the forefront of their own development.
Is there one project in particular that you could shine a light on?
Yeah. Maybe I can talk about a lady called Yvonne. I love the lady because I can see where she came from and where she's going today. She met a volunteer, one of our volunteers last year. The volunteer is called Rahai. The lady she was a stay-at-home mom who wasn't doing anything. The most she would do is maybe go to farm for other people and be able to earn $20 per month. So the communities we serve are really poor, very poor communities. So when she met Rahai, she was inspired by seeing that young lady who is a university graduate, who is able to live in that kind of community, the poorest of the poorest you can think of. Imagine a family that is sustained by $20. You can imagine the kind of life they have. But Rahai was living with them. So through different conversation with Rahai, the volunteer, Yvonne was able to actually change her mindset. And she said, why should I keep living this way? My head is working. I have a few assets here and there. I have a piece of land. What can I do to change the future of my family? So that's how, through living with Rahai, Yvonne was able to start a business of having something we call a tree nursery bed. Currently, her tree nursery bed has around 3,500 seedlings that she's selling to an organization called 1 Acre Fund. From $20 she was earning before meeting our volunteers, today she's earning $350 per month. And I like her story because I visit her often. She's become part of my story. I visit her often, and I wish I could show you the pictures of the home she was living in. I showed it to MK and Liz. It's a total transformation. And that transformation came about because of the volunteer that we deployed in her community.
You know, there's that saying that's, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Teach a woman to fish, everybody eats. So that's like the story.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Chisholm, I'd like to turn to you. I know you were located in Malawi, and really working on projects that were income generating, focused on livelihoods, especially for women and orphans. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about your work, which was now, I believe, 5 years or so ago, but you're still in contact with those who you worked with there. Can you share a little bit more about that experience?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. With the way the Co-Africa model works, as volunteers, we go in the communities, and together with the communities, we identify the needs that the community have, and also together we identify the solutions that can help to work on the needs. So in my experience, with my community, I worked with women in the community to identify the needs that they had. And one of the major needs that they had was financial instability, where the families were not financially stable to the extent that children were dropping out of school. And so they chose beekeeping as one of the projects that they believed would help them sort out the challenge, the financial instability challenge. And they chose beekeeping because it was a new and innovative project, and it was also, they also believed that it was going to be a sustainable source of income for them. And the other reason they chose beekeeping was because they had a forest nearby, and so that forest was going to help them to sustain the beekeeping project. And so I was with them from the beginning of the project, identifying the need, implementing the project, up to the time where they were able to produce honey from the project. And at that point, I reached out to the Malawi government through the Ministry of Trade to create market access for them. And that happened. And so it wasn't just about identifying the need, but it was about implementing up to getting to where we could see results, where the project was successful and they were able to make money that was addressing the challenge of financial instability. And up to today, as you said, up to today, I still follow up with my host community. I'm still in touch with my counterpart to just check how the project is doing, to monitor the project, and if there are any challenges that may be sustainable challenges, we work together with the community, find out solutions even up to now, because that was in 2018. I was a volunteer in 2018, but this is 2025, but I'm still in contact with the with the community. And but that wasn't easy. When I look back at the experience, it wasn't easy, especially because of cultural norms, of things like cultural norms, where men in the community, it's not easy for men in the community to believe and trust that as a young woman, I can help them and lead them, facilitate the projects that will bring change to the challenges that they are facing. But what I did is I made sure I integrated with the community, took time to integrate with the communities, listen to them, know that I understand them, understand what the needs that they have, and then give them the opportunity to come up with solutions. And so with that, it built trust. I built trust with that. They trusted me that, okay, I think she can lead us. And even though it wasn't easy, but I'm so grateful for that experience. I'm so grateful for the experience that Co-Africa gave me, because it helped me to build leadership skills as a woman, that even today I still use those leadership skills. And even the fact that as you're doing the projects, you need to understand that each and every information that you use in the project, you need to make informed decisions and understand the information that you're using. And that inspired me to do my master's in data analytics, and that's the master's I'm doing right now.
You really highlight so many important elements, and as you said, it's not just about the project itself, but it's about the implementation and the connectivity throughout, and also the follow-up to understand how it can be sustainable over time, and the fact that you are still connected very much with this community and the work that you're doing, and it's informed what you want to do going forward is pretty incredible. You also shine a light on another element and the challenges that you raise, especially for women and young girls, and how cultural norms in some instances are barriers. And it's interesting in the sense that the majority of volunteers are women across the programs, from my understanding. But we were chatting backstage, and Liz, you mentioned that, you know, collaboration with men and having men be part of these cohorts is also vital to their sustainability. I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit more.
Sure.
And how men are included in and absolutely must be part of this process.
Yeah, and it gives me the chance to give a shout out to our male volunteers who are also amazing. And a lot of them are so great at empowering women in their communities, sometimes even better because they have access to the men who hold the power. They're the decision makers. And so we have, with Core Africa, what we call the cluster model. We put volunteers in groups of three, like 3 to a region. They each have their own site and own village, but they're close enough that they can help each other and collaborate. And there are certain projects that, you know, men would benefit from having a woman. If they're doing like a sanitary napkin project, teaching girls how to use them, they would invite their female counterpart to come and help lead that session. And there are times when it helps to have a man go talk to the leaders, especially when you're going up the chain of command and you're going to senior people who don't know you. Having a male there can help you get the meeting that you need and be more successful. So it's that collaboration. But some of the men, I just have to say, they're just incredible. We had one, you know, Peter in Malawi, who after his service, he went to work for a women's end of period poverty organization and became a women's activist. And it's just, they are so enlightened to the plight of women by seeing it firsthand. In the villages, and their inspiration is wonderful to see.
You mentioned climbing the ladder, and so I'm wondering about in the formality of professional development and those sorts of things. I'm wondering how you all think about leadership without title, and when you don't have formality of a specific position, how do you think about that sort of in principle, but then also how does that show up in the work that you're doing so that those who are leading volunteer programs and leading within communities are recognized, respected? How are you thinking about that, and how do you work with especially your young volunteers and young girls to understand what that means to be a confident leader?
The true example is Chisomo. She was a volunteer, and you can see the kind of projects she did. It was a powerful testimony of what leading without title is. Yeah. So speaking to that, we have so many volunteers across Africa. They all are similar to, their stories are similar to Chisomo's. But I think the beauty of what we do is the way we empower volunteers is to make sure they are able to integrate and be part and parcel of the communities they serve. Through that, they are able to build like a trust and bonds of friendship, and leading by example. As I said before, those are university graduates who can do any other thing but going to live in poor places. But they do that. That already is something that it's a powerful tool that actually makes them be able to lead the communities. So I believe we call it soft powers. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I believe. They're there, they're out there in the communities, live the same way the community members are, although they're graduates, and then are able to make the changes that they make through the trust, through the friendship, and so on and so forth.
I think that the humility of the title of volunteer is really important. If there's one thing our volunteers get from the program, I hope it's humility. Because, you know, we're in almost 12 countries right now, 11 and hopefully Nigeria also later this year. And we had 23,000 applications for 650 positions, which is less than 3% acceptance rate. So these are superstars, and they have a lot of attention, and they have a lot of, you know, they've been very successful and stood out. And so they need a little humility. And it's helpful to send them to a place where they don't often speak the language. They have to learn a dialect.
And maybe if I may add, it's in the little things they do, the communities. The volunteers, you'll find them into the farms. You know, they are not scared to get dirty. Right. They go with the community members to the farms, they go to fetch water with them, they dance with them, they eat with them, they sleep where those community members are. And I think
with the snakes and the scorpions, and they're having these experiences.
Just to add on that, like in my experience, that's one of the things that really helped me to build, to gain trust from the community. The fact that they could see this girl from the city to come in and be with them, do whatever they eat, what they eat, and attend community meetings, even if there are not meetings that have to do with Co-Africa, so that I could just integrate with them, so that they should see that I'm part of the community. Yeah.
It's such a key element. Eat where they eat, sleep where they sleep, really live as they do. That's key to the success of their service.
Your examples really show the impact that you're having, not just on individual lives, but communities, but also the increased interest in joining the work. And I know you were all talking backstage about how there's more demand to be a volunteer than can be managed at the moment. And your application rates far exceed the capacity to develop those skills and to expand programs. And so I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit in terms of, with the question that always comes up is, if something is good, how do you scale it? And how do you take the lessons learned and the metrics on monitoring and all of that, how do you scale it in a way to drive more impact? You've got this demand, and so what are those key enabling factors that you all believe from your experience and your work are really needed to underpin that growth?
One of the key ones is to get on panel discussions at foreign policy Her Power events. So thank you for that. Really getting the word out and really having high standards and excelling in everything we do so that our reputation is rock solid. So that's what's going to open the door to our volunteers and help them get jobs. We want for Co-Africa on their resume to open doors. And, it's all about it, not just for the service experience and for the project that they do, but for the reputation of the organization so that we can scale up. But we have a very scalable model. We have a very simple model. It's a simple idea. It's Peace Corps for Africans. And it's, the service experience. In fact, we have another former Co-Africa volunteer in the audience who was in our very first group in Morocco back in 2013. And she ended up working with me in D.C., went for her master's. Now she's working for one of our big sponsors, and she just joined our board of directors. So I was thrilled about that. But the service experience that Hiba had in Morocco back in 2013 was very similar to what Chisomo had in Malawi, and is now similar to what the volunteers in Rwanda and all of our other countries are having. As we've grown and gotten bigger and expanded, we are working to perfect the model, but the service experience is almost exactly the same.
Great. And in the couple minutes that we have left, when you think about then, what are the kind of partners that you're working with now that are needed that can help enable that growth? What kind of organizations or partners are you all thinking about? It strikes me that we have a range of people in the audience here, those that are tuning in online, that are coming at these issues from their own distinct angles, from where they sit and the capacities that they have. And so, there'll be an opportunity to all connect in just a few minutes and learn more. But when you all think about that and the kinds of partners that you're working with and what you think about when you try to amplify this work, from each of you, what does that look like and what does partnership look like for you?
So we implement community-led development like many other organizations. But the only difference is that we deploy volunteers who go and live into the community with communities, and they're able to experience everything that the community is going through, and therefore work with them towards a sustainable development. So for me, I think any partner who would come and help us scale, support us with the scaling of volunteers, that's number one. So the scaling can also come from locally available resources. So on a bigger scale, the volunteers scaling up, and that's actually the most costly, maybe, kind of the scaling up. And then for us, wherever we are, make sure we partner with government and other, locally available partners to make sure we tap into the existing resources that are there and impact our people even more. So if we are like this, to make one project, why not make 3? Because you have the people, we have the resources. And the number one capital, asset, the number one thing we have is capital asset. We have a volunteer who is there. So if we can tap into what is existing locally, I think that also is helpful for the scaling up.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so that focus on community-led, locally driven.
And then any partner would help us get more volunteers would be welcome.
Excellent. Chisomo?
I'm going to give an example of one of the partners that we worked with during my service. What I believe that each and every phase of the projects, you need different partners. And when we were working on the business, because this beekeeping project was going to be a business for these women. And so we worked with the Ministry of Trade again to just empower them, to just help them understand how businesses work. Because these are women in the village that maybe some of them have never done a business before. And so having organizations or institutions that can come in and contribute positively to the projects that you're doing, as we did with the Ministry of Trade, empowering these women with business skills, that's very important. Yeah.
And Liz, to bring us home?
Yeah, quickly. I mean, we are all about partnerships. We really don't do anything ourselves. It's all about the partnership with the communities and our NGO partners. And I used to joke that we're like Seinfeld, we're an NGO about nothing. But actually, we're about everything. And, you know, hire our former volunteers, train the volunteers, partner with the volunteers in the field. A lot of NGOs have projects, efforts, all in communities where our volunteers are, and they can be eyes and ears on the ground. So, you know, value them, use them, but hire them.
Excellent. Very well put. Thank you all for joining us today and for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it. Yeah, thank
you. Please welcome Empower Work Chief Growth Officer Michelle Hilero, MIA.AI Partner and Chief Global Growth Officer Melissa Stiers, and Vodafone America's Foundation Director June Sugiyama for a conversation with Stacey Samuel.
I'm so happy to see so many of you able to stick around for these amazing conversations, and for those who are live streaming at home. To set us up, I'm just going to tell you, women's rights are at a crossroads. Despite renewed commitments, resources for gender equality are shrinking, and women remain underrepresented in leadership, especially in shaping the technologies that increasingly define our lives. This panel, we're going to get into the inclusive design and women-led innovation and what it can do to drive meaningful change, and how technology from AI to digital safety tools can be harnessed to expand opportunity, equity, and voice for women worldwide. And that was an AI-generated intro.
Bravo!
I wrote my own, and I thought, how fitting. And I'm so lucky, and we really are lucky to have these really innovative women who have dedicated their careers to empowering women, both in technology and in the workforce. June, you have been with Vodafone, the Vodafone Foundation now, for quite some time. How can technology be designed with women's needs in mind? And what role do women creators and leaders play in shaping more inclusive digital products and services? Because we're really talking about technology as a vehicle for change.
Thank you for that. And thank you all, we were just saying, for staying. I appreciate your attention. I know it's been a long day and cocktails outside. But so thanks for that question. And if I may just kind of give you an overview first and then drill down to some of the technologies that we're talking about. So when I come to these, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, because you all know, what it is you do, we do together. But so let me try to cover things that you might not know. So Vodafone is a unique animal in that we have 22 foundations worldwide. They're independent foundations, and it's been a philosophy of Vodafone's to build a foundation wherever we have operation. I run the one here in the United States, and like you mentioned, I've been at the foundation for over 25 years now. Amazing. And in telecom and tech for way longer than that. So I run the one here in the United States, although all of our Vodafone foundations run Tech for Good projects. Some of you may already know about the M-Mama project in sub-Saharan Africa to pay for mothers' transports to the hospital through mobile. And then the other one, we have Instant Network Schools, where we use solar driven equipment and a coalition of different platforms to provide education in refugee camps. Here in the United States, I have run a project called the Wireless Innovation Project to find the best wireless innovation for social impact. We've had instruments like detecting preterm birth to save that baby, cold chain vaccine delivery, smart toilets, fintech, and all kinds of stuff. So that was Tech for Good that we ran. A few years ago, we decided to drill down and focus on tech for women and girls. And we supported a lot of projects for women and girls. But most recently, we decided to focus on domestic violence. Reason for that being, Vodafone has launched this app called Bright Sky, if you can remember that name. And when you have a chance to download it, because we have it available here in the United States. We're the 13th Vodafone country to launch it here. And it's not an emergency app. It's an app for friends, families, colleagues to kind of review the situation and kind of strategize, and even for the survivor. And then we have resources that are locally available. It's translated into 2 languages here in the United States, expecting to do more. And I can tell you about the different ways we launched it in the 13th country. But one of the reasons that we decided to do this is because domestic violence is prolific. You know, breast cancer for women is 1 in 5. And you probably hear people talking about it. Your neighbors, your friends and colleagues openly talk about the fact that they're getting treatment or whatever. Domestic violence is 1 in 4, and it might even be 3 now. So we're through the launch of this app. Not only are we taking a holistic approach and not only just supporting the app, but we're supporting other organizations, nonprofit organizations that support domestic violence prevention, but also we encourage our employees to talk about it and just become familiar with it and be at ease to discuss it. And so I'll stop here because I don't want to go on and on.
But thank you, and we will continue to fold this into our conversation. You know, Michelle, you're with Empower Work. Not dissimilar, you use technology as a vehicle for change, but in the spectrum of workplace empowerment, 61% of the people that come to Empower Work are women. What kind of systems changes are needed to create more supportive environments for women in the workplace?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's 61% of the individuals that do come to Empower Work for workplace support are women. That's gone down over time, which is actually a positive thing in the sense of men are starting to come to the table and talk about things that they're challenged with. But of course, women are disproportionately affected by harassment, tough work situations, and especially in technology, because women are so underrepresented in technology. When they enter a tech field, I've been in economic development and mobility my entire career, and I've seen an increase in women, but it's still about 30% of the tech field is women. And so when they walk into rooms and they are not often surrounded by other women, it is a intimidating factor and often doesn't necessarily give them the potential to rise and grow within their careers. So often they come to Empower Work in order to get on the spot technology support so that they can, navigate those tough work situations.
And that's a perfect pivot to, Melissa, the work that you're doing at UNGA80. We've recognized, and certainly your organization recognizes, that AI is a powerful communication tool, but it's also mission driven. Can you share a little bit about how MIA is also driving women into technology?
Yes, so MIA stands for Mission Impact Academy. We are a public benefit corporation. We like to call ourselves the most human-centric AI company. To date, we have been around for about 2.5 years, and we train non-technical women and men in the skills of AI. We want to empower businesses and individuals to use AI, use it the right way. We train organizations like the European Central Bank, UNDP. We have a lot of partnerships all over the globe. We're in about 65 countries, but our mission is to empower 1 million women with the skills of AI by 2030. And that is a very big undertaking, and we can't do it alone. We have to do it through partnerships and through conversations just like these. In June at the Cannes Lion International Festival, we actually launched our Giving Back arm, which is called our Mia AI Circle, which is a free learning platform that does live learnings once a month and has office hours and all this other wonderful stuff for women all around the world to learn AI and to really take that first step. Because what we have seen, I think to your point, is that there's a lot of intimidation. There's intimidation that I am the only woman that's doing this, and also I don't know what I'm doing. And what we teach is that AI is actually a mindset before it's anything else. And so if we can help women and men overcome the mindset issue, we really have seen just exponential growth. We've seen Nigerian entrepreneurs get the bid. I saw a mother of 8 in California get a brand new job. They like to, in the Western world, they like to put us in a coffin at the age of 40. I saw a wonderful, beautiful, gray-haired 60-year-old woman in Switzerland get the CMO position at a bank. So that's amazing. And you don't hear about those things happening all the time. And all of those were students that went through one of our programs at Mia AI, and they credit that to the AI curiosity and learning AI.
Michelle, yes, we really, yeah, thank you. Because this conversation is meant to advance the conversation, for us to be thinking forward, Michelle, the work that you do really supports workers in complex workplaces. Exactly. How is technology and AI, like, Melissa is, championing an equalizer, if you will?
Absolutely. The key with AI, with the way that we support workers in vulnerable situations, is it's not technology to support the workers directly. It's to augment our ability to be human-centered. Yes. So one of the key things about the support that we provide, when individuals are going through a crisis at work, it affects their mental state, it often affects their physical and financial state. And having an individual, a human, to be able to navigate those complex work problems is incredibly important. However, we've been able to use technology and AI to support our peer counselors that are on the line with individuals that are seeking support to augment their work. And so we really believe that AI is enabling us to be more human-centered and scaling and reaching more workers. Empower Work has reached 500,000 workers since 2018. And really helping them navigate complex work situations. And most of these individuals are in low-wage jobs, don't have HR departments, don't have resources to navigate. So the ability to have somebody that they can connect with and can help them navigate those problems is incredibly valuable. And where AI can come in is it can give them access to tools that are online to help women create better resumes, to be able to practice their interview skills. So we integrate AI tools that we recommend to these help seekers when they're navigating these work crises. But the thing that's really core to what we provide is that human-centered approach. Knowing, because the cognitive part of empathy can be replicated with AI, but the adaptive and the and connecting is really where people get feedback and start to recognize that they want to make a change if they're connecting to a human. If they know that the feedback they're getting is coming from AI, they're less likely to feel accountable. They're less likely to move forward, and they're less likely to have change in their life. So we're really ensuring that AI is at the backbone and not replacing the human, but augmenting the human.
Okay, I'm so glad you said that, because I have to ask, Melissa, a great fear that a lot of people have, right? If you're not a digital native, depending on what generation you're from. Sure. So AI will not replace us. You have a little saying.
What we teach at Mia, it's not AI. AI is not going to replace you, and it's coming in fast. It's coming in hot. It's going to augment a lot. I love that you use the word augment. It's going to augment a lot of the jobs that we have now. But it's what we were talking. You can go to a surgeon. It's not AI that's going to replace the surgeon, but it's the surgeon that's using AI that will replace the one who is not. I would much rather a surgeon that's using AI operate on my knee than someone that's not. And so we really believe that the winning combination conversation, this is why what Michelle says just makes my heart so excited, is that human AI combo together. I am a prime example of someone that did not follow the human AI. We had a note taker on our prep call for this amazing panel with these wonderful women, and we sent it back, and it was all the notes, and it was just exactly what to wear and how your microphone will clip onto your belt, and be sure to wear pants and all this stuff. And I am the human that's had the total error because I had the AI notes and I didn't pay attention. So that was the human error. The AI did what it's right. But what we also really want the message to be as well is that we want women using AI. I want to give you a really happy stat right here. The World Bank estimates that by closing the gender gap in digital access, which is including AI, would mean to add $1 trillion to the GDP. That is, if we close that gender gap, and if we close that digital access gap with AI. And so I believe that all women are mothers. You may be caretakers, you may be fur babies, you may have children, mothers of this planet, mothers to one another, mentors, and AI right now is a toddler. AI is not a grown adult. It's not even a sassy teenager. It is a toddler, and it was built by awesome fathers. Give it up. Love you, fathers. But we need women from all backgrounds mothering and talking and using AI and training it, because when that becomes a sassy teenager, we want mothers, women from all over the world, speaking and having spoken and having gotten AI to continue to be empathetic, to continue to call out bias, and to continue to be the change that we want in our world.
Kudos.
You full-throatedly support this, June, and so much you sure do. Because so much of the work that the foundation at Vodafone emphasizes is women's leadership.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about the type of leadership that is necessary, that's going to advance, technology as a tool for women?
Well, first of all, women have to be at the table. The users have to be there when the technology is being developed. Otherwise, lots of things are lost. And it's great that you're encouraging women to use AI. I mean, AI is a learned technology. So if more women aren't using it and giving the technology the information, we will not be represented.
Correct.
I mean, you heard about somebody who asked for, they were interviewing and they asked for what salary they should ask, and they were given lower salaries because that's the only info that AI has so far, because women traditionally has earned lower than men. So they were basing it on what they knew. So unless we change it on our own and provide more factual information to them, and because it's a learned technology, we're not going to advance. Yeah. But the same example is, technology is not the end all be all. Right. We talked about that. Just like there's a human touch needed, even though we have an automated system. Same with Bright Sky, the domestic violence app. I mean, we give you all the facts there and what you should look out for. But if you're a friend, what are you going to do with all that information? You're still going to have to talk to your friend who's a survivor. If you're a family member, you're going to have to do that speaking piece and providing the emotional, tender touch to the person who's suffering. And then the other support that I wanted to tell you that Vodafone provides is if you have family issues, we give family leave. The past a few years back, we had a CEO that openly made a commitment to UN He for She to increase the number of women in our own leadership and to do whatever we can to increase the number of women in tech, and to provide supportive services like leave. And I think we have probably the longest maternity leave for a tech company in those days. I don't know, we may be behind now, but in those days.
Michelle, you're at Empower Work, but you've also dedicated your career to empowerment of women in the workplace. Any thoughts on, what does it take to see an increase of technologists in the workforce, particularly women, because that means there's training, and what sort of supportive measures are needed?
Yeah, so I've been in economic mobility for a couple decades, and technology training has been really core to how we've enabled women and men to really achieve kind of economic mobility. And probably about 15, 20 years ago, it was about 20% of the individuals that we were able to train in an organization called Perscolis were women. And about 2 years ago, we had probably topped out at about 40%. Wow. And so we definitely inched up over time. And it really was you can't be what you can't see, right? So it was really ensuring that we had women technologists talking and representing our organization so that women can see themselves as technologists. If it was panels, so people could see themselves in another female technologist. We actually tried some all-women training classes, but we actually ended up finding that wasn't really necessarily supporting and replicating the environment that they were going to go in when they went to work. And so although we had focused programs and support for women when we did the training, we made sure that we didn't necessarily create an environment that wasn't going to be consistent when they went into the workplace. But really building their confidence. If you look at history of the way that women are supported in math and sciences as they're growing up, it's often not necessarily where they're encouraged to shine. So we do overemphasize and really recognize the skills and the way that women bring their skills and knowledge to math and sciences and ultimately technology.
Melissa, can you build on that and share some of the opportunities that exist for women in technology, and certainly maybe some projections that you have, and maybe also some of the challenges that it'll take to overcome?
You know, I think June hit on a really great point. Is we are seeing. I mean, there's still sad statistics. You know, only 26% right now of women are in leadership roles with AI. We've got a dear former coworker that just finished her first year of her PhD in Arizona. She just met with Senator Kelly, and she's doing all this amazing stuff in Arizona, and I'm so proud of her, and she's an amazing voice, but there is just still so few and far between that are really leading the cause, that are in the leadership roles, and also that are behind the scenes making the technology. So of course, like you said, we're beating the drum horse, like invest in women, businesses, invest in their technology, invest and bring them to the table. I think that is obviously the most important thing. And then at all ages, we had something funny backstage. We have somebody that has their notes typed out, somebody that has their notes written out. My notes are on a phone. And so there's different stages and it's not just generational, but it's cultural. And there's a lot of fears, and sometimes you might have been told in your family, like, well, it's Terminator, so don't do it, don't use it. And so really, I think the more that we actually just have conversations with one another, and if I say, listen, Michelle, I am using a great app. It is a voice journal app. I get to talk to it every day, and I love to talk. And then by the end of the week, it tells me what's going on. Oh my gosh, and it's so cool. And then let me show you. If it goes like, if you remember when we started using QR codes and how that was like mind-blowing back in the day and very hard for the grandparents, and now everybody's, hi mom, and now everybody, she's watching, now everyone's using that. So if you can take people along with you, that's my biggest piece of advice, whether it is the QR code, whether it's using ChatGPT, whether it's, oh my goodness, I'm going to invest $1,000 in your startup, in this technology piece because I believe in you, or I'm going to bring you to the table of the investor that I know. That is the most important. And Michelle, to your point about the only women learning, I actually really, I agree with that too. I think there's amazing men that can come alongside and can actually be a voice and be a champion and bring women along, sit with women, make sure they're in the room, and not just make sure they're the token, but make sure that there's a plethora of them. So that's my hope, and that's what I would love to see moving forward as we continue this AI revolution, because just like the light bulb, just like we're not in the horse and buggy anymore, AI is here to stay, so we all have to get on board, and we really do not want to see anyone left behind, and especially women.
Michelle, we can't afford to let women fall behind. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're promoting more women in roles that are STEM related, so that maybe some of the barriers, they can overcome the barriers and find solutions to finding their way into more STEM related fields?
I think some of it, as I mentioned, starts as early as K through 12, right? So some of it is in the educational environments and the pipeline. Yeah. So I think there's work to be done. You know, the workforce is suffering from what has happened in the K through 12 system. Yes. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in order to uplift women and girls in the STEM field. So I think that's one of them. And I also think that creating an environment that, you know, that empathy thrives, and being able to bring your whole self to work really does create an environment in which women can thrive. And so I think, those things are, there was a panel a little while ago about menopause and having those conversations and creating an environment in which women feel that they're part of a broader community, that they're not an outsider. I think that's a huge part of what we can do in the tech sector and in all sectors to really have women have the opportunity to have a voice, to feel like they belong. Because if they feel like they belong, they're going to be able to make the change that they've been left behind from being able to advocate for.
June, you've been shaking your head. Can you talk a little bit about the holistic approach that you've taken and you're able to take through your foundation?
Well, like I mentioned, we don't just support the app, but we support other nonprofit organizations that support to fight domestic violence, and also the kind of support that we provide through our work to our employees, to provide leave, to educate, do training in domestic violence. We also support, just recently we formed a consortium of corporations that have programs within their company that trains and has a great effort to tackle domestic violence themselves. And like I mentioned, the fact that we actually can talk about this a little bit easier at work. We do lunch and learns and training programs just to get the employees
Across
a little
genders.
familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the collective approach to capacity building. Call to action. I'll start with, I'll go to Michelle and I'll take it around this way.
Yeah, I think the call to action is leveraging AI to elevate a human-centered approach. So how can we ensure that the human-centered approach, especially when it comes to empathy, is augmented by AI? And what I think there's a major concern about, if it's women and gender or if it's lower income, underrepresented communities, is that there's an expectation that AI will just, can scale and can reach everybody and can solve all of the problems. And that's not really the case. And you're going to end up with an environment in which the division between those that have access and don't is going to become wider when individuals only have access to technology solutions. So it's really ensuring that it's using technology to augment the human and not necessarily leaving the human behind, because that is going to end up leaving people and communities and women behind if that's the case.
And Melissa, Mia AI is so dedicated to reaching as many women. We're talking 1 million women. How do you propose and how are you working to not leave anyone behind?
So my advice actually is a little bit different than technology. It's relationship building still in the age of AI, authentic relationship building. We're going to have a reception right after this. We're going to have some cocktails and conversation, and that is actually key. I think that right now we are the most connected in the United States that we've ever been digitally, and we are the most lonely. 50% of all Americans say that they are dealing with loneliness, which is tragic. And so my advice is to continue to build authentic relationships. You can use AI to write that beautiful poem. You can use AI to help make sure that your schedule is cleared so that you have time to have that coffee. But build relationship, have a real conversation, and then move forward to make a change. And women, we cannot just be users of AI. We need to be shaping AI moving forward.
We have to talk more about, shaping AI, making sure the voice of women, and there's diverse women and women of diverse experiences, and that's true of all people. Why is that so critical as you're building and as you're seeing the evolution of this technology? Melissa, and then I'll go to you. Oh, no, June, please. Please.
One thing I wanted to mention is, we are encouraging people to be out there, to use AI and relationships. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's there and it's really important. But a few years ago, we had the lean in movement with the textbooks. But for all of us who are talking to younger people and teens that are coming up in career and they want to know, what they should do, I think we should teach them to speak up, to network and be at the table. But at the same time, we have to make sure that it's comfortable for them. Yes. And we are not a textbook case. And we have some cultural things, baggage, as well as some good things. And how we deal with other people is customized, and that's okay. And so we should talk, I think, about that we don't need to be textbook, that we should adapt to how we do best and network and use AI and speak to others.
Okay. I think that is the best call to action. We still stay connected as humans, and I'm going to use your phrase, Melissa, to take us out on this. Human plus AI is a winning combination. Very good. Thank you, ladies. Thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you for sticking around. Okay.
Thank you for your patience and for staying with us. We wanted to give an opportunity for the Qatar Fund for Development, who is so wonderful to partner with us here, but their director was stuck in traffic, could not make it. We were waiting and waiting and waiting, and couldn't make it for the excellent panel discussion that we had earlier. So we're very grateful that Rhoda Al-Naimi, how did I do? Investment Department's manager is going to join us for a few minutes and answer just a few quick questions and talk a little bit about QFD and some of the work that you do. And we've pressed her into service out of nowhere, so we really appreciate your being flexible. So I would love to just really ask you, firstly, a pointed question. The Qatar Fund for Development's Women in Conflict Zones initiative has witnessed women's resilience firsthand. And from your perspective, what shifts in policy, in financing, in international practice are most critical to move from rhetoric, all the stuff we've been talking about, to action and ensure that women are in conflict are not only protected, but empowered as leaders and participate in the change that we would like to see going forward?
Thank you, first of all, for this question. Women Conflict Zone initiative actually was one of our flagship initiative that Qatar Fund for Development has started a few years ago. And the idea was to focus on women's role, whether on the context of war, how to empower them and how to ensure that they are empowered as well within the context of the fragile context that they are living in, to make sure that they have this type of certain aid that they need. And additional to that, how to support them in income generative aspects. So we were looking at small, medium enterprises, whether in a fragile context and conflict zone, to ensure that they are also available to provide to their family, because we see women as a key component towards the family itself and also to the society. We have this kind of understanding to ensure that whether a woman is caring about her own children or beyond that, she is a part of its society, and making sure that she can be able to provide whether the context or difficulties that they are facing. You spoke about as well on policies specifically. Yeah. And the fund, when we started this initiative, we had a huge component on global advocacy and also publication of policies that ensure that we know where to go, and also to ensure what we are doing in terms of projects are actually tailored to the context that we work in. So in all of our initiatives that were under the Women Conflict Zone, either supporting Afghan women towards their higher education and supporting that they are also being established in certain education like universities within the US and so on. And during the time where 2 years ago, they actually needed a venue to ensure that they have this kind of continuation when they are leaving their home countries and so on. So one of the things that we supported is deployment of the American University of Afghanistan towards Doha, and what was hosted in the Qatar Foundation premises to the Education City. Yes, and we have been supporting this kind of initiative to ensure that they still have a space to continue what they started. And again,
So education.
education
Really
is key, and also making sure that also they are supported in other aspects beyond education.
Yeah, last question is on vocational training. You know, there's education, and then there's actually learning a trade and an opportunity. I'd really like to understand a little bit more about the focus on vocational training.
Vocational training, actually, one of the focus was to ensure that the robotics team in Afghanistan, for example, to continue their also education, and later on, actually, we supported them to be deployed to universities in the U.S. as well, to make sure that whatever skill-based opportunity they developed when they were targeting robotics, they continue as well with these kind of, let's say, knowledge as well. But vocational training, we see it as the basis when it comes to skilled opportunities, and to get them empowered, not beyond just the education, but also to be empowered with other skills as well. Because reality was not just only education is necessary when it comes to opportunities, skill-based opportunities, and being empowered not just on vocational aspect, but also we look at soft component towards that, and healthcare as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, I very much thank you for sharing some insights on the good work that QFD does. Thank you for that good work.
Thank you so much for
and
hosting us.
thank you for stepping in and helping us understand a little bit more about QFD. Please, everyone, thank Rhoda for standing up. Thank you, Sway.
Please welcome Diana Marrero back to the stage.
So I'll keep this really short and sweet because there are drinks outside. So thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that you got a lot out of it. We hope that you learned something from the conversations on stage, but also from each other, from the networking that we'll have shortly. So please do join us for other programming that we're having here in New York City during UNGA. We have a schedule that's packed with all sorts of conversations around healthcare, energy, tech. Check them out on our website. I also wanted to say a big thank you to our strategic partner, Bayer, and our partners, CARE, Core Africa, the Guttmacher Institute, the Made Possible by Family Planning Campaign, the Mohammed bin Zayed Foundation for Humanity, the Qatar Fund for Development, Tony Roma's, and the Vodafone Americas Foundation. And with that, I hope to see you at another UNGA program from FP, and hope we can get a drink outside. Thank you.